Hello everyone, I am the Creep's Cabin. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from? And what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. When I was 18, I moved out of my parents' house and into a small living area attached to my grandmother's house. It was separate from the main house, just a modest addition that had been built sometime in the 1970s. It had its own entrance, a small kitchen, a living area, a bedroom, and a bathroom. My grandmother let me live there for a small amount of rent while I went to school. It seemed like a great setup at the time, close to family, but still independent. Even when I was younger, though, that part of the house always made me feel uneasy. It wasn't that it was particularly old or in disrepair. The whole house was built in the 60s, and my part was an addition from the 70s, so nothing ancient. But something about it always gave me a strange feeling. When I was a kid, I'd go up there to explore sometimes, but I never liked being there alone. It always felt like I was being watched, like something was just out of my sight, lurking, waiting. But I chalked it up to childhood imagination and ignored it. After living there for a while, I had my younger brother and his friend over one night. We were just hanging out, watching movies, playing video games, just normal stuff. It got late, and I had work the next morning, so I decided to turn in for the night while they stayed up for a bit longer. I fell asleep without any issues, but at some point, what felt like just minutes later, I woke up with the sense that someone was standing next to my bed. The feeling was so strong that I opened my eyes immediately, fully expecting to see one of them standing there. But there was no one. I looked around the dark room, my eyes adjusting. The door was still shut. I sat up, listening. Nothing. Just the distant sound of the TV from the living area where my brother and his friend were. After a few moments, I got up, stepped out into the living area, and asked them if either of them had been in my room. No, they both said. They were still sitting exactly where I had left them. It was odd, but I didn't think much more about it at the time. I just went back to bed, trying to ignore the feeling of unease that still lingered. Eventually, I fell asleep. Years later, I moved out, and my younger brother moved in. It was the same setup, same little living space, same bedroom. One night, he called me, his voice serious. He told me something had happened. He woke up in the middle of the night, but he couldn't move. At first, he thought he was just having a weird dream, but then he felt it, something heavy on his back, pinning him down. He tried to move, but it was like his body was completely locked up, frozen. Then he felt something grab him. Hard. He panicked, struggling to move, trying to scream, but nothing came out. Then, in total desperation, he screamed out to God for help. Instantly, he could move again. He jumped out of bed, his body shaking. His roommate, who had been living in the second bedroom, ran in wide-eyed, saying he had never felt comfortable in that place. The next day, the roommate moved out. My brother didn't last much longer either. A few weeks later, he left too. Fast forward a couple of years. I had moved away, but eventually found myself back in town, looking for work. My grandmother offered to let me stay in the same place again. I hesitated, remembering the stories my brother had told me, but I pushed those thoughts away. I was an adult now, and those kinds of things didn't scare me. I needed a place to stay, and it was familiar, so I moved back in. The first week was fine. Nothing strange happened. I convinced myself that whatever had freaked my brother out was just a bad dream, maybe sleep paralysis. I had lived there before, and besides that one strange night years ago, nothing had ever really happened to me. Then one night, I woke up with a feeling I couldn't explain. I wasn't sure if it was a noise or just instinct, but I opened my eyes, feeling alert, on edge. My room was dark, but something was different. I sat up in bed, and that's when I noticed it. The closet door was slightly open. It had been shut when I went to bed. I stared at it, my breath caught in my throat. The darkness inside the closet was deep, deeper than it should have been, like it wasn't just shadows but something else. And then I saw it, a figure, small, dark, standing in the closet. It wasn't just a shadow, it was darker than the room itself. It stood there, unmoving. Then it stepped out. It moved to the foot of my bed, slow, deliberate. I didn't know what to do. I could feel it watching me, studying me. It wasn't threatening, not exactly, but it wasn't right either. It felt unnatural. I sat up fully, and without thinking, I yelled. Not words, just a loud, panicked sound. The figure turned sharply and bolted, straight through the wall. I jumped out of bed, ran out of the room, and into the next one, the room it should have gone into. For a split second, I saw something, just a fleeting glimpse, and then it was gone. I turned on the light, breathing hard, searching the room. But there was nothing. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I tried to convince myself I had imagined it. Maybe I was dreaming. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But I knew what I had seen, and I couldn't ignore the feeling that something had been there, watching, curious. I moved out shortly after that. I told my grandmother I had found something closer to work. I didn't tell her the real reason. I never went back to stay there again. Years later, I still think about it. I don't know what was in that room, what was in that house. I don't believe in ghosts, not in the traditional sense. But I do believe that some places carry things with them, things we don't understand. Maybe it was just a trick of the mind, a product of an overactive imagination, a mix of shadows and sleep. But deep down, I don't think it was. Whatever it was real. And I wasn't the only one who felt it. I don't know exactly when this happened, but I was probably somewhere between the ages of 14 and 17. We had been living in that house for a while, long enough for me to be used to its layout, its sounds, the way the floor creaked in certain spots, and the way the wind rattled the old windows at night. But no matter how familiar I became with it, I never quite felt at ease there. My room was at the very end of the hallway, facing the street, and at night, especially in the quiet hours when everything was still, the house never felt fully empty. It was like something pressed in on me, a weight of silence and unease that I couldn't shake. Maybe it was just the night terrors. I'd had them for as long as I could remember. Waking up in the middle of the night frozen, my body refusing to move no matter how much I struggled. My brain caught somewhere between dreaming and waking. Shapes in the darkness, whispers in the walls, the overwhelming feeling that I wasn't alone even when I knew I was. I told myself it was all in my head, just my imagination playing tricks on me. But that feeling never went away, and the only thing that ever made it bearable was my cat. She was always around, either curled up in my room or roaming outside, and she had this way of making me feel safe. She'd scratch at my window screen when she wanted to be let in, and it became part of my nightly routine. Waiting for her to come back, listening for the faint scrape of her claws, knowing that as soon as she was inside, I wouldn't feel so alone anymore. She had good timing, always seeming to show up right when I needed her. But that night, she hadn't come back yet. It wasn't even that late, maybe 10 or 11, and my parents were still up. I don't know why I was so impatient, but I decided to go outside and call for her. The air was cool, the kind of crisp night that makes every sound seem louder than it should be. I stepped out onto the front porch, the wooden boards creaking under my weight, and took a few steps into the yard. I called for her, the usual here, kitty kitty, scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. The streetlights cast a dim glow, but beyond that, the night stretched out, deep and impenetrable. The town was small, and at that hour it was quiet. No cars, no voices, nothing but the distant hum of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. I wandered a little further, stepping onto the grass, peering around the side of the house. She wasn't there. I sighed, figuring she'd come back on her own when she was ready. I turned back toward the house, my footsteps soft against the grass. And then I saw him, less than 2 feet behind me, standing completely still. My mind blanked. For a second, I couldn't process what I was seeing. He was right there, so close I could have reached out and touched him if I wanted to. An old man, silent, unmoving. He wasn't walking up to the house, he wasn't calling out, he was just standing there, as if he had been there all along, as if he had been watching me. My breath caught in my throat. The world around me seemed to shrink, the night closing in, everything narrowing down to just him and me. My stomach twisted, a deep, instinctive dread curling in my gut. I couldn't see his face clearly in the dim light, but I didn't need to. It wasn't just that he was there, it was how he was there. So close, too close. I didn't move, neither did he. We just stared at each other. I don't know how long it lasted, but it felt like forever, like time had stretched and distorted, trapping me in that single breathless moment. My mind screamed at me to do something, to say something, to run, but I was frozen. Then, finally, I turned. I forced my legs to move, walking, slowly, deliberately back to the house. Not running, even though every nerve in my body was telling me to. I reached the front door, my hand gripping the handle, and stepped inside. I shut the door behind me and locked it. Only then did I let myself breathe again. For a few seconds, I just stood there, heart pounding so hard it echoed in my ears. I wanted to tell my parents, but something in me hesitated. It didn't make sense, but I was scared to say it out loud, like acknowledging it would make it worse. Minutes passed. Maybe only a few, but it felt like an eternity before I finally forced myself to tell my dad. He was up in an instant, grabbing a flashlight, rushing outside. I followed, but I didn't step off the porch this time. He searched, stomping through the yard, shining the light into every corner, but the man was gone. There were no cars parked nearby that didn't belong to us. No footsteps in the dirt. No sign that anyone had been there at all. I tried to shake it off. Maybe he was just some drunk, I told myself. Maybe it was nothing. But I had lived in that town my whole life, and I had never seen him before. Not once in all my years there. And after that night, I never saw him again. I don't know how long he had been standing there, how long he had been watching me before I turned around. And I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't turned when I did. I don't want to know. For a long time after that, I couldn't step outside at night without my skin crawling. The yard didn't feel the same anymore. The house didn't feel the same. My cat still scratched at my window, still curled up in my room. But the comfort she brought wasn't enough to chase away the feeling that someone, somewhere, was still watching. The day started like any other in Chengdu. The air was thick and humid, carrying the scent of damp pavement and faint hints of street food from somewhere beyond the park walls. I had no real plans to visit the Chengdu Panda Park, but my tour guide, a fit and energetic woman in her 20s, suggested it while we waited for my parents to finish their meeting. It was supposed to be a quick stop, something to pass the time between shopping trips. I didn't mind, pandas were cool, and I had nothing better to do. The park was peaceful at first. Greenery stretched along the walkways, with bamboo swaying in the breeze. The enclosures were clean and spacious, housing sleepy black and white bears lounging on wooden structures. Families wandered past, children clutching stuffed pandas from the gift shop. The air was warm but not unbearable, though most people carried umbrellas to shield themselves from the relentless summer sun. That was when I first saw him. At first, he was just another visitor. A man in a beige trench coat, standing near the entrance, watching the crowd. It was an odd outfit for summer, but I didn't think much of it. I glanced at him once, and then forgot about him as we moved deeper into the park. But then I saw him again. We were walking toward the Red Panda exhibit, following a winding path that cut through a more isolated part of the park. The crowd had thinned, leaving only the occasional tourist snapping photos. That's when I noticed him standing at the end of the path. He had a black umbrella open, shielding himself from the sun. That alone wasn't unusual. People here did that all the time. But something about him made my skin crawl. His posture was rigid, his grip on the umbrella firm. And he was staring. His eyes never left us as we walked. I wasn't scared. Not really. I was a strong teenage guy, and my guide was athletic. He was just some pasty middle-aged man. Frail. But there was something unnatural about his expression. He didn't look lost or distracted. He looked expectant. I kept walking, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me, not my guide, not anyone else, just me. As we moved through the park, I started keeping an eye out for him, and he was always there. By the panda enclosures, near the food stalls, standing at the edge of a bridge as we crossed it. Every time I saw him, he would adjust his umbrella, opening or closing it depending on whether he stood in the shade or sunlight. It was a smooth, practiced motion like a reflex. I started watching him just as closely as he watched me. He never approached, never spoke, just kept his distance. But every time I turned, he was there. Something wasn't right. The feeling of unease settled in my stomach like a rock, heavy and unshakable. I told myself it was just a coincidence, just a weird guy in a big city. But my instincts told me otherwise. I had seen enough strange people in my life to know when someone was off. The hours passed, and the sun dipped lower. The park was quieter now, with fewer visitors. We walked toward the exit, moving through one last shaded path lined with trees. I turned my head slightly, just enough to scan the area. He was there, standing near the exit, watching. For the first time, he moved with intention. As we neared the park gates, he gave a small nod. Then he smiled. It wasn't a normal smile. His lips peeled back, revealing teeth that were sharp and uneven, like jagged bits of broken glass. They didn't look like they belonged in his mouth. I kept walking. I didn't stop. I didn't react. We stepped out of the park, blending into the movement of the city, and I didn't look back. That night, I lay awake in my hotel room, staring at the ceiling. My parents had returned from their meeting, tired but content. The shopping trip was still planned for tomorrow. The city hummed beyond the window, alive with lights and traffic. And yet, all I could see was his face. That smile. Those teeth. I never saw him again. But I knew, in some way, that he had been waiting for me, and I had left just in time. Our grade 8 trip to camp was supposed to be a fun, week-long break from school. The kind of thing that felt like a final send-off before high school. The camp was deep in the woods, about a 3-hour drive from home. It had cabins for us to sleep in, a mess hall, and a big fire pit where we'd gather at night. The counselors and camp staff would tell scary stories about the area, the kind meant to spook kids, but never actually scare them. Just enough to make you hesitate before stepping out into the dark by yourself. But the thing that scared me the most, the thing that none of those stories could prepare me for, was something they never mentioned. At night, once we were in our cabins, we'd goof around until the last possible minute before bed. We weren't supposed to stay up too late, but nobody actually followed that rule. We'd tell jokes, whisper about stupid things, and mess with each other. A few of us had made it a habit to check out the windows before getting too loud, just to make sure no staff members were walking around. If we saw someone, we'd cut the noise and pretend to be asleep. That night, someone glanced out the front window and immediately froze. "There's someone out there," they whispered. We all rushed to take a look. Standing outside, perched on a stack of wooden pallets near one of the maintenance sheds, was an old man. He looked like he was in his 60s, maybe even older. He was just standing there, completely still. The only thing moving was his long, unkempt hair in the slight breeze. We all stared at him for a while, waiting to see if he'd do anything. Maybe he was a caretaker or something, but there was something off about him. His clothes looked dirty, and he wasn't wearing anything that suggested he worked at the camp. The more we looked, the creepier it felt. He didn't move at all, didn't even seem to blink. We decided to stop messing around after that. Nobody wanted to risk getting caught outside after curfew, not with some strange old man just standing there. About 5 or 10 minutes later, someone checked the window again. He was gone. We all looked out into the darkness, scanning the area near the shed, but there was nothing there. The pallets were still stacked up, but he wasn't on them anymore. The weird part was, we never heard him move. The camp was surrounded by woods, but the area right outside our cabin was all gravel and dirt. If he had walked away, we should have heard footsteps, but there was nothing. It was my turn to check the back window. That side of the cabin faced the woods, and the window was high up, at least 10 or 15 feet off the ground, because of the way the land sloped. I walked over and pulled back the blinds. The old man's face was right there, staring back at me. I jumped back so fast I nearly fell over. My heart was pounding. There was no way he could be standing there. The ground outside, that window was way too far down. Either he was on something tall, or I didn't even know what. I didn't look again. I didn't want to. The others didn't believe me at first, but the look on my face must have convinced them, because nobody went near the windows for the rest of the night. We all climbed into our bunks and pulled the blankets up tight. None of us could sleep. Every little noise outside made me jump. I kept expecting to hear footsteps crunching on the gravel, or worse, see a shadow pass by the window again. But nothing happened. Eventually, exhaustion won over fear, and I drifted off. In the morning, we told one of the counselors. They just laughed it off, said we must have imagined it. But I know what I saw. We all saw him at first, and I was the one who saw him last. Standing where he had no reason to be, staring at me through that window. The second time I felt that kind of fear was years later, at my great-grandmother's visitation. The funeral home was small and quiet. The kind of place that felt empty, even when people were inside. It had that smell, too. Not bad, just still. Like flowers and dust, and something you couldn't quite place. The visitation started in the late afternoon and ran into the evening. My family was all there, talking in hushed voices, standing in little groups. I mostly stayed near my parents, feeling awkward, not really knowing what to do with myself. Then, at exactly 8 p.m., the power went out. Everything went dark. There were no windows in the room we were in, just a few dim emergency lights near the ceiling. People muttered in surprise, but no one panicked. Someone said it was probably the wind knocking something out. That happened sometimes, but I didn't like it. Being in a funeral home at night, with no lights, it made my skin crawl. The place felt different in the dark. The air seemed heavier. The quiet was louder. The doors to the viewing room were slightly open, just enough to see the edge of the casket. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help it. My eyes kept flicking back toward it, like I expected something to change. I wasn't the only one feeling weird. Some of the older relatives were whispering about how it was strange timing, saying things like, "She never liked the dark," or "maybe it's a sign." I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was just a coincidence. The power would come back soon. Then something in the hallway fell over with a loud crash. My stomach dropped. A few people gasped. Someone used their phone's flashlight to check, but the hallway was empty. A metal stand had tipped over, the kind they put pamphlets on. It wasn't near anything. It was just lying there. No one had been close enough to knock it over. A few minutes later, the lights flickered back on. The funeral director came out and apologized, said the outage had affected a few buildings in the area. Everyone laughed it off, shaking their heads, going back to talking like nothing had happened. But I couldn't shake it. The way the darkness had felt, the way the air had seemed to press in, and the way that stand had fallen over on its own. I still don't know what to make of it, but I know that I never want to be in a place like that again when the lights go out. My grandmother grew up in Nantucket in the 1920s. She was just a child then, a little girl with long curls and a curious mind. The neighborhood she lived in was one of the finer ones, with neatly trimmed hedges, white picket fences, and large, well-kept homes with wide porches. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other. Neighbors greeted one another by name, stopped to chat on sidewalks, and children played freely between the houses. She was particularly close to the elderly couple who lived next door. Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore had been in the neighborhood for as long as she could remember. They were warm, friendly people, always inviting her over for cookies or lemonade. Mr. Whitmore had a particular fondness for long walks. He walked every morning without fail, a slow and steady pace, his hands clasped behind his back or tucked into his coat pockets when the weather was cold. He always wore a hat, a dark woolen one in winter and a lighter, straw one in the summer. He would tip it politely to neighbors as he passed. The routine was comforting, predictable. It was a rhythm that my grandmother had grown used to, one that made her feel safe and secure. Whenever she saw Mr. Whitmore strolling by, she knew all was well in the world. One autumn, though, things changed. Mr. Whitmore had fallen ill. At first, it was just a cough, nothing serious. But as days passed, he grew weaker. His walk stopped. My grandmother would look out the window, expecting to see him, but the street remained empty. Her mother explained that he wasn't feeling well, that he needed to rest. Weeks went by. She still visited Mrs. Whitmore, but the house felt different without him in it. The air inside seemed heavier, the rooms quieter. There was always the faint scent of medicine lingering in the halls. Mrs. Whitmore tried to keep a brave face, but my grandmother could see the worry in her eyes, the tiredness in the way she moved. Then, one crisp morning, my grandmother was sitting on the porch, playing with a small wooden doll. The wind rustled the leaves, sending them skittering across the cobbled street. She happened to glance up at just the right moment. There he was, Mr. Whitmore, just as she had always seen him, strolling down the street. He was wearing his usual woolen coat, his hat perched atop his head. He walked with the same slow, steady pace, hands tucked neatly behind his back. When he reached the house, he looked her way and tipped his hat, just as he always did. She didn't think much of it. It was a relief, really, to see him out and about again. It meant he was better. He must be better. Excited, she rushed inside to tell her mother, but before she could speak, she was told to get ready for the day. The moment passed, and she put it out of her mind. Later that afternoon, she walked next door. The house was quiet, still carrying that heavy feeling. She knocked, and after a moment, Mrs. Whitmore answered. She looked tired, her eyes puffy and red, as if she had been crying. With childlike enthusiasm, my grandmother told her what she had seen. She explained how happy she was to see Mr. Whitmore taking his walk again, how she had missed seeing him out in the morning. She asked if she could come in to see him. Mrs. Whitmore stood frozen for a moment. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. Then, She gave my grandmother a long, searching look, as if trying to decide whether she had truly heard what she just heard. Finally, in a voice that was barely above a whisper, she said the words that would stay with my grandmother for the rest of her life. "He passed away this morning." The words didn't make sense. My grandmother stood there, her little hands gripping the sides of her dress. "But I saw him," she wanted to say, but something in Mrs. Whitmore's face stopped her. There was such sadness, such exhaustion, that my grandmother didn't have the heart to argue. Instead, she nodded and stepped back. She spent the rest of the day trying to make sense of it. She had seen him. She was sure of it. She could still picture the way he moved, the way he tipped his hat. She knew what she had seen. And yet, days turned into weeks. The neighborhood mourned the loss of Mr. Whitmore. The funeral was held at the local church, and the whole community attended. My grandmother sat quietly, listening to the adults talk about what a good man he had been, how much he had loved his walks, how he had always been kind. As time passed, the sharpness of the memory faded, but it never disappeared completely. She never spoke of it, not even to her parents. It wasn't until years later, when she was grown and had children of her own, that she finally told the story. By then, she no longer questioned what she had seen. She didn't think of it as something frightening. It wasn't a ghost story, not really. There were no flickering lights, no strange shadows, no eerie whispers in the dark. There was just a man taking his final walk. A quiet farewell to the world he had known, to the streets he had walked for so many years, to the neighbors he had greeted each morning. Maybe it was just her imagination, or maybe, just maybe, there was something beyond what we could explain. The thought never scared her. If anything, it comforted her. It made her believe that death wasn't just an end, but a passage, a step into something else. And in that step, perhaps, there was a chance to say goodbye. I remember that night so well, even though it was so many years ago. I was 11 or 12, just a kid who spent my summers wrapped up in books, taking out as many as I could carry from the library, losing myself in them until my eyelids grew heavy and I fell asleep with the light still on and the book open beside me. That was normal for me. That summer, I had been tearing through anything I could get my hands on. Fantasy, mysteries, science fiction, whatever seemed interesting. That night, though, I picked up something different. Dracula. I had heard about it, of course, but I had never read it. I remember settling into bed, tucking the blanket around my legs, the cool night air slipping in through the window. It had rained earlier, and the air smelled fresh, damp, carrying that scent of wet earth and pavement. I didn't have my box fan on because the temperature was comfortable, and the breeze through the window was just enough. The fan sat there, wedged into the window frame, taking up most of the space. Only a small gap remained at the top, where the pane didn't quite close all the way. I had barely started reading when I heard something. A rustling sound, faint at first, just enough to make me glance up. At first, I thought maybe it was the rain, leaves shifting outside, or maybe just the house settling the way it sometimes did. I went back to my book, but then it came again. A soft, deliberate sound, like something scraping or shifting against the screen of the window. I looked up again. The light from my lamp was bright enough to cast shadows, but my eyes had to adjust to the darkness beyond the window. And then I saw it, a shape, small and dark, pressed against the top of the box fan. At first, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. It looked like a lump of fur, shifting slightly, something small trying to wedge itself inside. And then, the movement was unmistakable. It crawled, slow and careful, and then its wings stretched just slightly before folding in again. A bat. I sat frozen. My breath caught in my throat. It was right there. Right there. It had somehow squeezed its way through that tiny opening, dragging itself inside. For a moment, I couldn't move. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts all at once. Was I really seeing this? Was I dreaming? I had just started reading Dracula. Was my mind playing tricks on me? But no, I could hear the soft scratching of its tiny claws against the wood of the window frame, the rustling of its wings as it tried to settle itself. I knew I had to do something. But what? I didn't want to startle it. If it started flying around my room, I didn't know what I would do. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe as quietly as possible. Slowly, I moved my legs off the bed, careful not to make the mattress creak. I had to get out of my room, get my dad, do something. I stood up, my feet pressing softly against the floorboards, and I took the slowest, quietest steps I had ever taken in my life. The bat was still there, clinging to the wood, shifting slightly but not moving too much. I had to be careful. One wrong move, and it could panic, and I did not want that thing flapping around my face in the dark. I reached the hallway. My heart was pounding. I didn't want to wake my mom. I didn't want to wake my little sister. I just needed my dad. I stepped to the top of the stairs and called down in the quietest, most controlled voice I could manage. "Dad." Nothing. I could hear the faint hum of the TV downstairs, but no response. I swallowed and tried again, just a little louder. "Dad." A moment passed. Then I heard him shift, heard his footsteps as he came to the bottom of the stairs. "What is it?" I hesitated, then said, "There's a bat in my room." Silence. Then what? I swallowed hard. A bat. It crawled in through my window. He was quiet for another moment. Then I heard him start up the stairs. I stepped back, making room for him to pass, and he moved toward my room. I followed behind, my heart still hammering. He walked in, glanced at the window, and for a moment, he didn't say anything. Then, he exhaled sharply through his nose, like he had been hoping I was imagining things, but now had to accept that, no, there was in fact a bat in his kid's bedroom. The bat had wedged itself between the two panes of glass, its little body pressed into the tiny space. I watched as my dad took a piece of wood that had been sitting nearby, something he had been using for a project earlier that day, and carefully nudged at the bat. It shifted but didn't move much. He tried again. The bat clung stubbornly, not wanting to go up or down. I stood back, watching as my dad kept trying, moving the piece of wood, trying to get it to leave. It must have been at least 20 minutes, maybe more. I don't know. Time felt weird. My chest was tight, my whole body tense, just waiting for it to suddenly fly out into the room. But it didn't. It just stayed there, stuck, refusing to move. Finally, my dad let out a frustrated breath. He adjusted his grip on the piece of wood, and in one quick movement, stabbed it down. The bat let out the most awful, high-pitched shriek I had ever heard. A horrible, piercing sound that made my stomach twist. And then silence. I stared. My dad moved quickly, disposing of the bat, cleaning up, making sure there was no mess left behind. He said nothing as he left the room. And I just stood there, staring at the empty window, at the fan still wedged in its place. The gap at the top now seemed much bigger than it had before. That night, I barely slept. Even though the bat was gone, I couldn't shake the feeling of it. The way it had crawled in, slow and deliberate. The way it had clung there, refusing to move. The way it had screamed. Every little noise in the dark made my skin crawl. The next morning, we told my mom what had happened. My dad said, almost casually, that when he first came up to my room, he thought I had been dreaming, or maybe I had imagined it. He had seen the book on the floor beside my bed, Dracula, and for a moment, he had thought, well, what were the odds? And honestly, I couldn't blame him. It was ridiculous. The same night I decided to start a vampire novel was the same night a bat chose to crawl into my bedroom. What were the chances? But I knew what I had seen, and that was the last time I ever slept with my window open at night. It was a quiet evening, just before sunset, when I decided to take a walk around my childhood neighborhood. I hadn't been back in years, but I found myself drawn to the familiar streets lined with old maple and oak trees. The air was cool, carrying that distinct scent of damp earth and cut grass. It reminded me of late summer evenings when I used to ride my bike around these very same streets, weaving through the sidewalks, trying to race the setting sun. The neighborhood hadn't changed much. The same houses stood in place, though some looked more worn than I remembered. A few had new paint jobs, some had new fences, but the general structure of the area remained the same. I walked slowly, letting the nostalgia settle in, taking in every house, every crack in the pavement, every porch light flickering on as dusk crept in. I rounded a corner, past an old house I vaguely recalled belonging to a family with 2 dogs, and that's when I saw her. A little girl, maybe 5 years old, sitting at the base of her driveway on a tiny pink bicycle with training wheels. Her feet were planted firmly on the ground, and her hands gripped the handlebars. She wasn't riding, just sitting there, staring. Even from a few houses away, I could feel her eyes locked onto mine. It was unsettling, but I told myself it was just a kid being curious about a stranger walking by. I kept walking, but as I got closer, I noticed something strange. Her lips were moving. At first, I thought she might have been talking to herself or singing softly. But as I got even closer, I realized it was something else. She was whispering. The whispering was continuous, a hushed murmur that I couldn't quite make out. It wasn't playful or rhythmic like a child singing a song under their breath. It was steady, deliberate. I slowed my pace slightly as I approached, trying to make out the words. But no matter how hard I listened, I couldn't. It was just a soft, constant stream of sound. Something about it made my skin crawl. I kept my gaze forward, pretending not to notice, but I could feel my heart rate picking up. My breathing grew shallow as I passed directly in front of her driveway. That's when she did something that sent a cold chill down my spine. She raised a single finger to her lips. Shuh. That one gesture sent every hair on my body standing on end. I didn't stop. I didn't say anything. I just kept walking, but I picked up my pace. I could feel my legs wanting to move faster, my body urging me to get away. My footsteps echoed slightly against the pavement, and I resisted the urge to look back. A few more houses down, I let out a slow breath, trying to shake off the unease. It was just a kid, just a weird, unnerving kid. I told myself she was probably playing some kind of game, maybe mimicking something she had seen on TV, maybe just trying to be creepy on purpose because kids can be strange like that. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, that image of her whispering and then shushing me stuck in my mind. I turned onto another street, putting more distance between myself and the house. My steps fell into a steady rhythm, and slowly, the tension started to fade. I let out another breath and forced myself to relax. But then a thought hit me. I hadn't seen anyone else outside. There were no parents, no siblings, no neighbors chatting in their yards. Just that little girl, sitting alone in her driveway as the sun dipped lower. It wasn't unheard of, but something about it felt wrong. I tried to shake it off, but my feet carried me faster. I cut through an old shortcut I used to take as a kid, a narrow path between two houses that led back to my street. The ground was uneven, covered in dry leaves and twigs that cracked under my weight. By the time I made it back to where I was staying, my chest felt tight, as if I had been holding my breath for far too long. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the feeling of unease. The little girl's face lingered in my mind. The way her lips moved, the way her eyes never left mine, the way she raised her finger to her lips. I barely slept. The next morning, I told myself it was nothing, just a weird encounter, something to forget. But as I sat drinking my coffee, curiosity gnawed at me. Maybe it wouldn't hurt to pass by that house again, in daylight, just to see if she was still there. Maybe see if there were signs of a family, toys in the yard, something to make it all feel normal. So I went. I walked the same route, rounding the same corner. But when I reached the house, the driveway was empty. The little pink bicycle was gone. The house itself looked off. The front yard was unkempt, the grass overgrown, and the blinds on the windows were closed tight. There were no signs of life. No cars in the driveway. No toys. No sounds. I stood there for a moment, stomach twisting. The air felt heavier than before. I told myself I was just being paranoid, letting my imagination run wild. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I turned and walked away, this time without looking back. That was the last time I ever walked through that neighborhood. I can go on all day with creepy stories from my past. Some of them I can brush off as childhood imagination, things that don't feel real when I think back on them. Others linger in my mind like scars I can't quite erase, and no matter how much I try to rationalize them, they don't go away. This one, the one about my grandmother's death, is one of those stories. I was young when she died. I don't remember exactly how young, but young enough that death was still a concept I didn't fully understand. I knew what it was in the simplest terms. People went away and didn't come back. That's all it meant to me. When the phone call came, my grandmother's husband, who wasn't my grandfather, was screaming on the other end. He wasn't just crying, he was wailing, a sound I had never heard a man make before. My mother grabbed the phone, and I remember the way her face changed, the way the color drained from it as she listened. My brother and I, being kids, had no idea what was happening, but we started crying anyway because everyone else was. We didn't even know why we were crying, just that it was something awful. I had only met my actual grandfather once, and even then, I don't remember what he looked like. The only time I ever saw his face or thought I did, was the night my grandmother died. That night, my mother let me stay in her bedroom with her because I was upset. I wasn't sure why I was upset, but it felt like there was a weight pressing down on me, something more than sadness, something that didn't feel like my own emotions. My mother was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, lost in whatever grief she was feeling. I curled up next to her, staring at the wall, watching the dim light from the bedside lamp cast long shadows around the room. The cold set in slowly. At first, it was just a slight chill, the kind you get when you forget to close a window. But it kept growing, creeping into my skin, into my bones. I pulled the blanket tighter around myself, but it didn't help. The room felt heavier, like the air was thickening. Then I saw it, something moving on the wall. It wasn't a shadow, it wasn't a trick of the light. It was like an old film projection, grainy and blurred, flickering as it played out in front of me. A man in red and white striped pajamas walked across the wall, his movements slow, deliberate. He sat down in a chair that wasn't there, then disappeared. I couldn't breathe. My body refused to move. My mother sat up suddenly, eyes locked on the empty chair beside the dresser. I didn't dare look away from the wall, didn't want to see if anything was there. I heard her whisper something under her breath, something about her father. That's when I realized she had seen it too. I stayed awake long after that, long after the image had faded and the room had warmed again. Every little noise made my skin crawl. The creak of the house settling, the rustling of tree branches against the window. Everything felt wrong. When sleep finally took me, it wasn't restful. It was the kind of sleep that felt like falling, like slipping into something I wasn't meant to touch. A few nights later, I was home alone, sitting on the couch in the living room. From where I was, I could see straight down the hall into my parents' bedroom. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I wasn't scared at first. I was just sitting there, staring blankly at the television, even though I wasn't really watching it. Then the cold returned. It started the same way it had in my mother's bedroom, slowly at first, then all at once. The air felt thick, pressing against my skin like damp cloth. My breath hitched in my throat, and even though every instinct told me not to, I turned my head toward the hallway. It didn't feel like I was in control of my own movements. Something was guiding me, forcing me to look. At the end of the hall, there was a man. He wasn't like the blurry figure on the wall. He was there, solid, standing in the shadows just beyond the reach of the living room light. He wore an old-fashioned suit, the kind from the 1930s or 40s, complete with a fedora and a cane that he held in front of him. His face was wrong. I could see the outline of it, but it was like someone had smeared his features away, like an unfinished painting. The only thing clear was his mouth, a thin black slit that stretched unnaturally wide. I couldn't move. I couldn't blink. I couldn't do anything but stare as that mouth grew and grew, consuming what little of his face I could make out. The darkness around him spread, swallowing the end of the hallway, and with it the man. The last thing I saw was that empty, gaping mouth before everything went black. I don't remember what happened next. One moment, I was on the couch, and the next, I was in my bed. It felt like no time had passed, like I had blinked and been transported there. But the fear lingered, an ache in my chest that refused to go away. I never told anyone about that night. I never asked how I got to bed. Maybe I walked there in a daze, or maybe I passed out and someone found me. I don't know, and I don't want to know. What I do know is that I never felt safe in that house again. Even in the daylight, even when I was surrounded by people, the weight of something unseen pressed down on me, watching, waiting. Years have passed since then, but I still refuse to go near that house. I can't even drive past it without feeling cold all over again. Maybe it was all just the overactive imagination of a scared child. Maybe it was stress. Maybe it was something else. But no matter how much I try to rationalize it, the fear remains. And I know deep down that some things aren't meant to be explained. I don't remember any of it, not in the way that people remember things. I was just a baby, too young to form memories, too small to understand the world. But my mother remembers. She remembers every night, every moment, every terrifying second of it. And I know her stories well enough now that they feel like my own memories, even though they aren't. A few months after I was born, my father left. My mother says he barely looked at me when he packed his things, stuffing his life into bags and disappearing with the woman he had been seeing behind her back. My mother didn't know much about the woman at the time, just that she was younger, attractive in an unnatural sort of way, and that people whispered things about her. Strange things. My mother didn't believe in those whispers, not at first. She only started to believe when the woman rolled down the car window as they were leaving. When she told my mother what she had done. "You'll see," she said. "You'll see what happens to your child." At first, my mother didn't know what she meant. Maybe it was just something cruel, meant to hurt her. But that very night, something changed. I wouldn't close my eyes. Newborns are supposed to sleep deeply, breathing in soft, steady rhythms, their tiny faces peaceful and still. But I didn't. My mother says I lay in my crib with my eyes wide open, staring into the darkness, unblinking. She would walk over, wave a hand in front of my face, but I wouldn't react. I wouldn't cry, wouldn't move. I just stared. The first night, she thought it was strange but not alarming. Maybe it was just something babies did. But then it happened again, and again, and again. Every night, the same thing. She tried to pick me up, rock me, sing to me. She would lay me down and watch, waiting for my lids to droop, for sleep to take me, but it never did. My eyes stayed open, staring at something she couldn't see. She stopped sleeping. She was exhausted, but she couldn't bring herself to close her eyes. Not when I was like that. Something about it felt wrong, unnatural. She says it felt like something was in the room with us, something she couldn't see. The air felt heavy, thick, like it pressed against her chest, making it hard to breathe. And then there were the shadows. She swore she saw them move, just out of the corner of her eye, shifting when she wasn't looking directly at them. She thought she was imagining things, that exhaustion was playing tricks on her mind. But no matter how much she tried to ignore it, it was there. The feeling, the presence, the sense that something was terribly wrong. It lasted a week. A full week of sleepless nights, of me lying there, staring into nothing, of her watching me and feeling helpless, terrified, unraveling. She didn't know what to do. She had never believed in curses, never put any stock in stories of black magic or spirits. But she was desperate. She was losing her mind, and I, her newborn baby, was at the center of it all. So she went to see a woman, a priestess, someone people whispered about in hushed voices, someone my mother never would have gone to under normal circumstances. But this wasn't normal. The woman didn't ask many questions. She just looked at my mother, really looked at her, and nodded like she already knew what was happening. She gave my mother a small bag. My mother says it was made of rough fabric, tied at the top with a string. When she took it, it felt heavy in her hands, and the smell coming from it was thick and metallic. It smelled like blood. The woman told her to hold it over my head, say some words my mother can't remember anymore, and then throw it away. That was it. My mother did exactly as she was told. That night, she stood in our small apartment, held the bag over me, and whispered the words as best as she could. Then she took the bag outside and threw it in the dumpster. She says the moment the bag hit the metal, something inside it burst. The fabric tore open, spilling its contents across the dark pavement. And that's when she saw it. The pieces of meat, or whatever it had been, weren't red. They weren't pink. They were black. Not rotten, not decayed, just black. Pure, unnatural black, like they had been burned without fire. She ran back inside, locked the door, and didn't look back. That night, for the first time in a week, I slept with my eyes closed. Everything changed after that. The air in the apartment felt lighter, the shadows stayed where they belonged, and my mother finally allowed herself to sleep again. It was over. And then a week later, my father came back. She hadn't spoken to him since the day he left. He had abandoned us, chosen someone else, and she had no reason to think he would ever return. But there he was, standing outside our door, knocking frantically. He looked different, disheveled, hollow-eyed, desperate. He begged her to let him in, begged her to forgive him. He told her everything. The woman he had left for, the one who had cursed me, had cheated on him. Not just with anyone, with his own brother. He had lost everything. My mother didn't take him back. She never would have. He had made his choice. But sometimes she wonders. She wonders if whatever had been in that bag, whatever had been taken out of me, had found its way back to the person who put it there in the first place. She never saw my father's mistress again. She never asked what happened to her. And she never looked back into the dumpster where she had thrown that bag. Some things are better left unknown. The house was old, built sometime in the 1920s, and had been added onto over the years. Extra rooms, a second story, bits and pieces tacked on, giving it an uneven, almost unnatural layout. It creaked constantly, groaning under its own weight, shifting with the wind, settling into the earth. I had grown up in that house, and yet it never truly felt like home. There was always something about it that made me uneasy. One afternoon, my mother, brother, and cousin were getting ready to head to the park. They were moving around, gathering their things, their voices overlapping with the sounds of drawers opening and closing, the back and forth of feet against the wooden floors. It was a normal day, completely unremarkable, and then they left. The house, once filled with noise and movement, fell silent. I sat in the dining room, scrolling through my phone, waiting for my friends to come pick me up. I was still adjusting to the quiet when I heard it, a loud, unmistakable thud from upstairs. My heart lurched. The sound had come from my brother's room. For a moment, I forgot I was alone and nearly called out to him. But no one was home. A strange pressure settled over me, a weight in my chest that made it suddenly hard to breathe. My fingers tightened around my phone. My first instinct was to ignore it, to pretend I hadn't heard anything. Houses make noises, after all. It could have been anything, a shift in the wood, something falling over on its own. But then I heard the stairs creak. It wasn't the usual groaning the steps, made when someone walked too heavily up or down. This was different. It was deliberate, measured, like a footstep. I was frozen, every nerve in my body on high alert. The dining room didn't have a direct view of the stairs, which only made it worse. I couldn't see who or what was there. My mind raced through possibilities. Had someone broken in? Had I forgotten to lock the door? I strained my ears, barely breathing, listening for more sounds. And then another creak. Something was coming down. I moved without thinking, slipping into the kitchen as quietly as possible. My hands were shaking as I grabbed the biggest knife I could find from the counter. It felt heavy, unfamiliar in my grip. I positioned myself directly across from the doorway, my back pressed against the cabinets, my knees bent slightly so I could move if I had to. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The next few seconds stretched into what felt like hours. The house was so quiet now, except for my own breathing, which I was trying, and failing, to keep steady. I focused on the doorway, waiting for something to appear, some shadow or movement that would confirm what I already knew. Then another sound, not from the stairs, but from the kitchen itself. A faint clinking, like glass touching glass. The dishes. Someone, or something, was in the kitchen with me. I gripped the knife tighter, my palms slick with sweat. I thought about running, but my body refused to cooperate. The air felt thick, like the walls were pressing in. I could feel my pulse in my throat. Then outside, a car horn blared. I jolted at the sound, my body moving before my brain could catch up. I sprinted out of the kitchen, through the front hall, and out the door. My feet barely touched the ground. I flung myself into the car, slamming the door behind me. My friend looked at me, eyebrows raised. "You good?" I couldn't answer right away. My lungs were still fighting for air. I stared at the house, half expecting someone, to be standing in the doorway watching me. But the house just sat there, quiet and still, as if nothing had happened. As if I had imagined all of it. My friend laughed when I finally told him what had happened. He said he would have gone upstairs to check. I shook my head. I had no desire to die that day. When I got home later that night, nothing seemed out of place. Everything was exactly how I had left it. No open doors, no misplaced objects. The house was calm, almost indifferent, like it had no memory of what had happened. I never told my parents about it. I didn't see the point. But my parents had their own story about the house, one that had happened a year earlier when my brother and I were at a friend's for the weekend. They had been up late, watching TV. My dad was in his recliner, my mom on the couch, closest to the stairs. They weren't thinking about anything unusual, just talking about the photos they had taken the day before. My mom had mentioned how strange it was that so many of them had orbs in them, how she had never noticed it before. And then, without warning, the couch lifted off the ground. Not a little, not just a slight shift. It rose, hovered, suspended for a second that stretched into eternity. My mom sat frozen, her breath caught in her throat, unable to move, unable to comprehend what was happening. Then, with a violent force, the couch slammed back down. The entire house shook with the impact. My dad jumped up. He didn't hesitate. He didn't question it. He just started yelling, his voice filling every corner of the house. You will leave my family alone. Do not touch them. Do not hurt them. Do not show yourselves. You will leave them alone." He walked through the house, shouting, demanding. My mom stayed on the couch, too terrified to move. After that night, the strange occurrences didn't stop completely, but they changed. My parents never saw anything move again. They only saw glimpses, shadows where there shouldn't have been any, orbs in pictures that seemed too perfect to be dust or tricks of the light. The feeling never went away, though. The house always felt wrong, like something unseen was still there, still watching. We don't live there anymore. I don't think about it often, but sometimes late at night I wonder, was it the house itself? Or was it something else, something older than the house, something that had been waiting long before we ever stepped inside? I don't think I'll ever have an answer, but I do know one thing: I'm glad we left. And I hope, wherever we went, it didn't follow. Late summer in a small town near Calgary. The air is warm but carries the first hints of fall, that crisp edge sneaking into the night breeze. The sky is a deep navy blue, stars scattered across it like bits of crushed glass, and the moon is just bright enough to cast long shadows. It's the kind of night where you feel like you can stay out forever. Me and my friend are outside, just killing time, walking around the edge of town. There's a stretch of undeveloped land, mostly dirt and tall grass, some trees in the distance, and a few scattered construction materials where people had planned to build, but never did. It's the kind of place that feels completely abandoned, but you always get the sense that someone somewhere is out there watching. We'd been here plenty of times before. There was a barbed wire fence cutting through part of it, but we had a system to get through without much trouble. We reached the fence, gripped the wire just right so it doesn't catch our clothes or skin, and slipped through one after the other. The dirt on the other side is loose, kicking up small clouds under our feet as we move. There's a big hill of packed dirt a little further in, probably left over from some half-finished construction project. It stands taller than anything else around, maybe 15 feet high, with a steep drop on the other side. We decide to climb it, just to see what's beyond it. It takes a few seconds to get up, the dirt sliding a bit under our weight. As soon as we crest the top and are about to slide down the other side, we both freeze. Below us, in the open stretch of land, is a cluster of tents. Not just a few, but at least a dozen, maybe more. Some are small, like regular camping tents, but others are bigger, almost like makeshift shacks built from tarps and wooden pallets. There are dim lights coming from a few of them, flickering, like lanterns or maybe candles. The whole area looks lived in, but not in an orderly way. Trash is scattered around, dark shapes moving in the low light. We immediately drop down onto our stomachs, pressing flat against the dirt. We watch for a while, our breathing slow and careful. About 15 minutes pass. Nothing happens at first, just faint noises from the camp, murmurs of people talking, the occasional clatter of something shifting. Then, one of the tents rustles, and a man steps out. He's scruffy, unkempt, with a thick ginger beard. His clothes are worn loose, hanging off his frame like he's been wearing them for too long without washing. He takes a few sluggish steps away from the tent, turns slightly, then starts to piss right there on the ground. We don't move. My heart is pounding so hard I'm sure he'll hear it. If he looks up, even for a second, he'll see us, two dumbass kids lying flat on the dirt hill like idiots. And if he sees us, then what? I don't know how many people are down there, but it's way more than just him. I don't want to find out what happens if they don't like strangers watching them. The guy finishes, scratches his stomach, and wanders back toward his tent. We exhale, almost in sync. Time to go. We start shifting our bodies, trying to inch back down the way we came. But then we hear something else. A low hum. An engine. We go still again. The sound grows louder, and then from the far side of the camp, a motorized golf cart rolls into view. It's moving slow, scanning the area. There's a spotlight mounted on the front, and it sweeps the ground as it goes. Two figures sit in it, one driving, the other holding something, maybe a flashlight or a radio. They aren't just messing around. They're looking for something, or someone. We press even flatter against the dirt, hoping we just look like part of the hill. The spotlight sweeps past once, then again. The cart keeps moving, heading in a slow loop around the perimeter of the tents. We don't breathe until it passes out of sight. That's it. We need to get the hell out of here. We start moving again, faster this time, scrambling backward down the hill. Dirt shifts under our hands and knees, small rocks tumbling. We don't care about being quiet anymore. Just go, go, go. We hit the bottom, sprinting toward the fence. The field feels bigger now, stretching farther than it did before. Every shadow feels like something watching. We reach the fence, start slipping through, and that's when we hear it. Hey, what the hell are you doing? A voice deep and angry. Footsteps pounding against the dirt. Someone is running after us. We don't look back. We shove through the fence, barely feeling the sting of the wire as it scrapes our skin. The moment we're through, we bolt. Full speed, not stopping, not thinking, just running. Our legs burn, our lungs feel tight, but we don't slow down. We can hear them behind us, at least one guy, maybe more. The ground crunches under heavy boots. We cut through yards, past fences, over patches of gravel and grass. Streetlights start to appear up ahead, the first signs of our neighborhood. We make it to my friend's house, slam through the gate into his backyard, and crouch down behind the garage, trying to control our breathing. Silence. We sit there for a long time, listening. Nothing. No footsteps. No voices. Eventually, we peek around the corner. The street is empty. No one followed us. We don't say anything. We just go inside, lock the doors, and sit there in his room, staring at the floor, trying to process what just happened. Neither of us goes out to that undeveloped land again. I had always wanted to have a sleepover at my best friend's house. When she moved into the new place, she invited me over for the first time, and I was excited. It was an older house, bigger than her last one, with narrow hallways, wooden floors that creaked with every step, and a steep staircase leading up to the bedrooms. Her parents had mentioned in passing that an old man had passed away there, falling down the stairs. It was one of those things that I didn't think much about at the time. We set up for the night in her bedroom, which had a window overlooking the backyard. The walls were mostly bare, just a few posters and shelves with books and trinkets. She had a wicker dresser and a matching desk, both of which held her collection of makeup, perfume, and jewelry. The house itself had an odd feeling to it, not something I could put into words at first, just a slight unease. I assumed it was just because it was unfamiliar. The first strange thing happened when I went to the bathroom. As soon as I stepped in, a gust of freezing air hit me. It wasn't just a draft, it was sharp, making the hairs on my arms stand up. I looked around for a vent, but there wasn't one anywhere near the door. I ignored it and finished quickly, shutting the door behind me. As soon as I walked away, the door slammed shut behind me with enough force to rattle the frame. I froze. My friend called out from her room, asking if I had slammed it. I told her no, but I brushed it off, convincing myself that maybe it hadn't latched properly and had just swung closed. We went back to hanging out, sitting on her bed, talking and laughing. After a while, she turned on her music and started painting her nails while I flipped through one of her magazines. That's when we both noticed the sound. A faint rattle, rhythmic and steady, like something shaking. I turned my head toward her dresser, and all her perfume and makeup bottles were trembling, clinking against each other. The entire wicker dresser was shaking. Not violently, but enough that there was no mistaking it. The movement stopped as quickly as it started. My friend and I looked at each other, but didn't say anything. We were both trying to act like it wasn't a big deal, but I could see in her face that she was just as freaked out as I was. A little while later, we decided to go downstairs for snacks. As we started down the steep steps, I felt a light push on my back. It wasn't enough to make me fall, but it was deliberate. I caught myself on the railing and glanced at my friend, who was just ahead of me. She had a weird expression on her face. When we got to the bottom, she hesitated before saying that she had felt it too, that same soft pressure nudging her forward. At that point, I wanted to tell myself that we were imagining things, that it was just in our heads. We grabbed some chips and drinks, trying to shake the weird feeling, and went back upstairs. The rest of the night passed uneventfully, and we eventually got ready for bed. She had a full-size bed, so we laid down facing opposite directions, both of us exhausted. I was just starting to drift off when I felt it. The mattress dipped between us, as if someone had just sat down. I could feel the shift in weight, the pressure pulling the blanket slightly. My first thought was that it was her cat. I reached back to pet it, expecting to feel soft fur, but the second my hand moved, the pressure disappeared. The dip in the bed smoothed out instantly. My friend must have felt it too, because she moved at the exact same time. Neither of us said anything, but we both laid there, stiff, barely breathing. I listened for any sound, trying to hear if the cat had jumped down, but there was nothing. No movement, no footsteps. The room was silent. My skin prickled with unease, but I forced myself to stay still. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe the mattress just settled. Maybe. I don't know how long I laid there before I finally fell asleep, but I remember waking up multiple times throughout the night, each time feeling that same creeping unease. The house was silent, but I felt like I wasn't alone, like something was just out of sight, watching. I didn't sleep well. In the morning, my friend and I didn't talk much about it. Her parents asked how our night was, and we just said it was fine. I didn't want to bring it up. Maybe I was afraid they'd confirm something I didn't want to hear. Maybe I just didn't want to say it out loud. I never slept over at that house again. I never thought much about the small things that happened around my house. A light flickering here and there, something falling when there was no wind, doors creaking open slightly even though I knew I had closed them. They were things I could explain away. Old house, faulty wiring, loose hinges. Nothing that really stood out as unusual. Nothing that made me stop and think, this isn't normal. I guess I should start from the beginning. My sister passed away in 2002. Cancer. She loved the paranormal. She had all these books and magazines about ghosts and hauntings, about life after death, about things I didn't really believe in at the time. I was only 12 when she died, and even though I missed her every day, I never truly thought about the things she was so fascinated by. Then a few years later, my dad died suddenly. One day he was there, and the next he wasn't. I was 15. Losing them both so young shaped me in ways I don't think I even realized at the time. One day, when I was younger, my stepmother bought my friend and me a pendulum. It wasn't anything special, just a little metal chain with a small weighted ball on the end. The lady at the shop sold it to us like it was a game, nothing superstitious. I didn't think much about it. Years later, I learned what it was actually used for, communicating with spirits. I only tried it once, but nothing happened, and I never really felt like trying again. Until that day. It was December 2012. I was in the middle of a divorce. Life was stressful. I felt disconnected from everything, just going through the motions. It was the middle of the day, and I was sitting on the couch, absent-mindedly scrolling through my laptop. Just another normal afternoon. Then I heard it. A loud bang came from the bathroom. Not a little creak or a soft thud, but a real, forceful bang, like something had been thrown or knocked over. My heart jumped. I sat frozen for a few seconds, listening, waiting. Nothing. The house was silent again. Slowly, I got up and walked to the bathroom, half expecting to find something on the floor. Nothing. Everything was in its place. The towels were still folded on the rack, the shampoo bottles lined up neatly in the shower. Nothing was disturbed. I checked the shelves, the cabinets, even behind the door. There was no explanation for the noise. A thought crossed my mind. The pendulum. I hadn't touched it in years. It was in my bedroom, tucked away in a drawer. I felt something stir inside me. Curiosity, nervousness, maybe a little excitement. Something had just happened. Maybe this was the kind of occurrence I had been waiting for. I went to my room, found the pendulum, and brought it back to the couch. I held it between my fingers, letting the weight dangle freely. I started asking questions. At first, nothing happened. The chain just hung there, motionless. Then slowly it started to move. Circles for yes, back and forth for no. I asked if anyone was there. The pendulum began to move in slow, deliberate circles. Yes. I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening around the chain. I asked if it was my sister. Yes. I felt my chest tighten. I asked question after question, throwing in things I already knew to test it. Is the TV on? No. Is it daytime? Yes. The answers were right every time. I didn't know what to think. Then I asked something different. Why are you here? The pendulum started swinging in big, fast circles. Yes. I frowned. That wasn't a yes or no question. I tried again. Is something bad going to happen? Big circles again. Yes. I felt a weight settle in my stomach. I asked the question a second time, just to be sure. The answer didn't change. My hands were trembling. I took a deep breath and whispered, goodbye. I set the pendulum down and sat there, staring at it. I didn't know how to process what had just happened. It didn't feel like a game. It felt real. Too real. I called my grandmother. I told her everything. She listened quietly, then said she thought it was my sister trying to warn me. That thought made me feel both comforted and uneasy at the same time. Less than an hour later, I got into my car to go meet a friend. The moment I turned the key, the dashboard lights flickered. The radio reset. Everything blinked out for a second before coming back on. I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel. It happened again a few times that week. Every time I started the car, the lights would flicker, the radio would reset. I took it to a mechanic, and it turned out to be a loose fuse. An easy fix. Just a coincidence. Maybe. But the timing was strange. It had never happened before. And it started the very day I used the pendulum. I haven't touched it since. I've thought about it. I've even wanted to try it again. But something stops me every time. I tell myself that I need another sign, another unexplained occurrence, before I take it out again. But maybe that's just an excuse. Maybe I don't actually want to know what might happen next time. Because if it really was my sister warning me about something, then maybe I was lucky that time. Maybe next time, I won't be. I was probably 6 or 7, still young enough to see the world in bright colors, but old enough to start noticing the shadows in between. It was a weekend, and my parents let me stay over at my friend's house for the night. His name doesn't matter now. What matters is what we saw, what we heard, and what I felt that night. We spent the day doing what kids did, laughing, playing games, shoveling snacks into our mouths without a care. We played his Nintendo 64 for hours, our eyes glued to the screen, our fingers clicking buttons like our lives depended on it. The outside world didn't exist in that moment. Just the glow of the screen and the sounds of the game filling the room. Time moved strangely when you were a kid, slipping by unnoticed until something happened to mark it. It was around midnight when we heard it. A noise outside. Not a crash, not a shout, not even a siren. Just something that made my friend pause the game and glance towards the window. His living room faced the street, a narrow alley running alongside the row homes, a passage that seemed forgotten in the dark. It was a place where the world could break down in secret. I followed his gaze, and there they were. 3 figures. One man sat on the ground, hunched, barely moving. The other 2 stood over him. Something was wrong. Even as a kid, I knew it. Their body language, the way they loomed over him, how he didn't look up. Something was very wrong. I didn't understand what I was seeing at first. My brain refused to process it. Then, one of the standing men moved. A glint of something in his hand, long, metallic, heavy. It came down fast. The sound it made, the dull thud of metal against flesh, was not something I had ever heard before. The other man kicked, over and over. The man on the ground barely made a sound. I felt sick. My stomach twisted, but I couldn't look away. My friend, older, wiser in ways I wasn't, turned to me, his face pale, his eyes wide. He pulled the blinds down slowly, cutting us off from what was happening just feet away. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. We sat there in silence, the game paused on the screen, the controllers forgotten in our laps. We could still hear it. The sounds of something breaking, something ending. The rhythm of it, relentless, final. It went on for what felt like forever. I wanted to believe that the man on the ground would get up, that it wasn't as bad as it sounded. But deep down I knew. When it finally stopped, the silence felt worse. A deep, suffocating silence that settled in our lungs and stayed there. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did my friend. We didn't speak about it. What was there to say? We were just kids. What could we have done? By morning, the world had moved on, as if nothing had happened. But I hadn't. I was different. Something had shifted inside me, a crack that would never fully close. I realized, at 6 years old, that we were not special, that there was nothing stopping the world from being cruel, that people could die in the dirt while others walked by oblivious, that there was no one watching over us, no one stepping in. I never spoke about it. Not to my parents, not to my friend, not to anyone. But I carried it. I still do. Because once you see the world for what it really is, you can't unsee it. And I saw it that night, through a window, in an alley, where the world showed me exactly what it was. It was summer break, and those nights felt endless. The kind of nights where the air stayed warm long after the sun went down, where the streetlights cast long, eerie shadows, and the world felt different. more open, more alive in ways that didn't feel entirely normal. I was 12. My best friend and I had been outside for hours, riding around on our Razor scooters, the hottest thing to own that summer. The smooth pavement of the neighborhood was perfect for tricks and speed, and we raced up and down the street, laughing, daring each other to go faster, jump higher. The air smelled like freshly cut grass and pavement still holding onto the day's heat. The cicadas buzzed in the trees, a steady, droning hum that filled the night. We weren't supposed to be out that late, but it was summer. The rules were looser. Parents were asleep or watching TV in dimly lit living rooms, and the world belonged to us. At least, that's how it felt. At some point, we both felt it. That eerie, creeping sensation like someone was watching. We weren't talking about anything scary. We weren't thinking about ghosts or murderers, but the feeling was sudden and heavy. It settled over us like a damp blanket, making the warm night air feel colder. I glanced at my friend, and I could tell he felt it too. His expression had changed. We didn't say anything. We just kept riding, but slower now, more aware. Every shadow stretched longer. Every rustle of the leaves sounded too deliberate. The streetlights flickered in that annoying way they do, but that night, it felt ominous. "Let's go in the garage," I said finally, trying to sound casual. He nodded, not arguing. We coasted up the driveway, the wheels of our scooters whispering against the concrete. The garage was half open earlier in the night, but now we pulled it down all the way and went through the side door. It locked with a simple handle mechanism. Nothing fancy. Nothing that should have made what happened next so terrifying. The second we closed it and locked the handle, the knob started twisting. Not just once. Not just a gentle test. It turned back and forth violently, rattling in its frame like someone was trying to get in. We froze. My stomach dropped so fast I felt sick. My friend's face went pale. We just stood there, staring at the doorknob, the realization sinking in that this was real. We weren't imagining it. We weren't making it up. Someone was outside, and they were trying to get in. The garage was dark except for a single light overhead, casting weird, sharp shadows over everything. Our scooters clattered to the floor as we backed away. The rattling didn't stop. If anything, it got worse. More frantic. More aggressive. We didn't speak. We didn't even breathe. We just turned and ran. Straight through the garage, up the small steps into the house, through the mudroom, slamming the door behind us and locking it without even thinking. Our feet pounded up the stairs, skipping steps, tripping over ourselves. But we didn't stop until we were in my room, panting, adrenaline making my hands shake. My stepdad was asleep. Waking him up was the only thing that made sense. He was a big guy, ex-military, the kind of person who didn't scare easily. We burst into his room, barely able to get the words out. He was up in an instant, grabbing the baseball bat he kept by the bed. No hesitation, no questions. He just went. We followed, hanging back as he unlocked the door, stepping out onto the driveway. The air was thick, still buzzing with that feeling of being watched. But whoever had been there was gone. The street was empty. Nothing but the hum of streetlights and the distant bark of a dog. He walked around the house, checked the bushes, even stood in the street for a moment, scanning the dark yards around us. Nothing. "You probably scared yourselves," he said finally, voice rough from sleep. Could have been the wind. It wasn't the wind. We knew it wasn't. But what were we supposed to say? That we stood there, staring at the door while the handle rattled in a way that no wind could make it move? That we felt something, someone, just on the other side? That we knew, without a doubt, we weren't alone? We didn't argue. We just nodded, pretending to believe him, pretending to feel better. We didn't go back outside that night. We sat in my room, wide awake, waiting for morning. My friend left early, and when I finally worked up the nerve to check the garage door again, my stomach dropped all over again. The handle had scratches around it. Small, desperate marks like something sharp had dug into the metal, trying to force its way in. I never told my stepdad. Never told anyone, really. Because the truth was, I didn't want to know what would have happened if we hadn't locked the door in time. I was about 15 when my sister asked me to babysit her kids one night. It wasn't a big deal. I had done it plenty of times before. Her house was familiar, just a couple of streets away from my own, and I liked spending time with my niece and nephews. They were young, full of energy, but easy to handle. It was just supposed to be a normal night. My sister and her husband were going out for the night. and I promised I'd take good care of the kids. The house was quiet, the only sounds being the low hum of the TV and the occasional giggle from my niece as she played with her dolls. The boys were already asleep, so it was just her and me in the living room. The night was dark outside. The house had big windows, the kind without curtains, just blinds that didn't fully block out the world beyond. It was a little unsettling when I glanced outside and saw only blackness staring back at me. But I told myself it was just my imagination making things creepier than they were. Then, out of nowhere, my niece, who was barely 5, looked up at me with wide eyes and said, "That man keeps watching me." My heart skipped a beat. I turned quickly, scanning the room and then the windows, but I saw nothing. Just the reflection of the dimly lit living room in the glass. "There's no one there," I told her, trying to sound calm. Kids say weird things all the time. Maybe she had an overactive imagination. But she just frowned, looking back at the window. Her little face was serious. "He's right there." I looked again, but I still saw nothing. The backyard was empty. The street beyond was quiet. I forced a smile and told her not to worry. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. A little while later, my phone rang. It was my dad. He never called me when I was babysitting, so I knew something was wrong. His voice was panicked. "Are you okay?" "Yeah," I said slowly, suddenly uneasy. "Why?" He exhaled sharply, like he was trying to calm himself down. "The neighbors called the police. There was a man looking into your window." My blood ran cold. I turned my head slowly, staring at the same window my niece had been pointing at earlier. I felt sick. I had looked and seen nothing. But someone had been there. Someone had been watching us. My niece had seen him before I even knew to be scared. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to move, locking the doors and making sure all the windows were shut. I turned off the TV, listening carefully. Then I saw the flashing red and blue lights through the front window. The police were here. I held my niece's hand as I walked to the door, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. When I opened it, 2 officers stood there. Their presence should have made me feel safe, but it only made the situation feel more real. They asked me if I was okay, if I had seen anyone, if I had noticed anything strange. I told them everything I knew, which wasn't much. But my niece had seen him. She had seen him, and I had ignored her. The officers told me they had caught the guy. He had been in a bar earlier that night, drinking heavily, and had followed a young woman home. She lived right next to my sister's house. When she got inside and locked the door, he couldn't get in. But he didn't leave. He was drunk, confused, and instead of going away, he had wandered over to my sister's house. Maybe he thought it was hers. Maybe he was just lurking, trying to figure out what to do next. That's when he started looking in through the windows. Watching, the woman he had followed had called the police. She had seen him outside her window first, then later saw him standing outside our house. I shuddered. If she hadn't called, if the neighbors hadn't seen him, I didn't even want to think about what could have happened. The police took him away. They said he was being held overnight for drunk driving, attempted forced entry, and trespassing. Maybe worse. I didn't sleep that night. Even when my sister and her husband came home, and I knew I was safe, I couldn't get the image out of my head. The idea of someone standing in the dark, watching. I had looked right at that window and seen nothing. But he had been there, and my niece had known before I did. I was young when it happened, college-aged, full of energy, and eager to take on responsibilities that, looking back, I probably wasn't fully prepared for. I was a Girl Scout leader in Oklahoma, spending my summers leading groups of girls on camping trips. It was supposed to be fun, an experience filled with laughter, learning, and bonding. But that summer, everything changed. Camp Scott was one of those places that felt both welcoming and eerie at the same time. It wasn't isolated, but it wasn't exactly bustling either. There were always people coming and going, some we recognized, others we didn't. Hunters passed through with their dogs, hikers wandered the trails, and across the way, the Boy Scouts had their own camp. It was normal to see unfamiliar faces. I never thought much of it at the time. That night, the air was thick and warm. The kind of heat that clings to your skin even after the sun goes down. The girls were exhausted from a long day of activities, and I was looking forward to a good night's sleep. The cabin we were staying in wasn't much, just a simple wooden structure raised slightly off the ground. It wasn't meant to be luxurious, just a place to sleep, to keep us safe from the elements. The first time I woke up, it was to the sound of barking. At first, I ignored it, thinking it was just some hunters passing through. Their dogs always seemed restless, sniffing the air, excited about the scent of wild animals in the trees. But as I lay there listening, I realized these dogs weren't barking in excitement. They were whining, almost crying, as if something had spooked them. Annoyed, I got up, slipped on my shoes, and stepped outside. The moonlight was weak, barely illuminating the trees beyond the cabin. I expected to see hunters passing by, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. But there was no one, just the dogs. They were under the cabin, not near it, under it. I crouched down, trying to see them in the dim light. Their bodies were pressed against the dirt, tails tucked, their eyes wide and frantic. They were scared. I tried shooing them away, but they wouldn't move. I had never seen them act like this before. Normally, they didn't even acknowledge us. But tonight, they refused to leave. I sighed, rubbing my arms, suddenly feeling uneasy. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the leaves. A small sound, but in that moment, it felt loud, unnatural. I forced myself to shake off the feeling and went back inside. It was late, and I needed sleep. But the dogs didn't stop. Every time I drifted off, their whining and barking would start again. I got up at least 3 more times, each time growing more frustrated. I whispered harshly at them, tried throwing small rocks near them to scare them off, but they didn't care. They stayed put, hidden beneath the cabin, their bodies rigid and alert. At some point, exhaustion took over. I collapsed onto my cot and let sleep pull me under, the sound of those dogs crying fading into the background. By morning, they were gone. I didn't think much of it. I was too tired, too annoyed to dwell on it. We packed up and left Camp Scott, heading back home, already planning our next trip. The girls were chatting excitedly, recounting their favorite moments from the trip, completely unaware of how strange the night before had been. I was eager to put it behind me. Just a weird night, I told myself. Nothing more. Then the news came. A week later, I sat frozen in front of the television, staring at the screen as the words sank in. 3 Girl Scouts. Kidnapped. Raped. Murdered. Their bodies left in the woods. At Camp Scott. I couldn't breathe. My mind was racing, trying to piece it together, trying to make sense of it. The same camp, the same cabins, the same trees that we had walked past just days ago. The place where I had led a group of girls, where I had spent an uneasy night listening to dogs whine beneath our feet. The dogs. The memory came rushing back, hitting me like a punch to the stomach. The way they had huddled under the cabin, terrified of something unseen. Had he been out there that night, lurking in the shadows, watching, waiting? Had the dogs sensed him? Had they known what was coming? I thought about the times I had stepped outside, standing in the open, vulnerable. How close had I been to danger without even realizing it? Had he been there, just beyond the trees, hidden in the darkness, watching me as I searched for the source of the dog's fear? The thought made my skin crawl. I kept replaying the night in my mind, over and over. Every sound, every moment. Had I seen something without realizing it? Had I brushed past the killer in the dark? My stomach turned at the thought. For days, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined him out there, the same way he must have been that night. Silent, waiting, and I imagined those girls, terrified and alone in the woods, wondering if anyone would save them. The police searched for the killer. They had a suspect, but the case was never truly solved. The horror of it all lingered in the air, an open wound that would never fully heal. Camp Scott closed down after that. No one would ever camp there again. Even now, all these years later, I think about that night. The way the dogs cowered, the way the wind felt wrong, the way I had stood outside, oblivious to what might have been watching me. I think about how close we were, how lucky we had been to leave when we did. And I think about the girls who weren't so lucky, the ones who never made it home. I will never forget them, and I will never stop wondering if, that night, the killer had already been there. When we were kids, my cousin and I had this weird habit of pretending to be ghost hunters. It was never anything serious, just 2 bored kids running around with fishing nets, peeking into dark corners, and trying to scare ourselves more than anything else. We had always been the type to make up stories, playing secret agents or explorers, but ghost hunting was one of our favorites. There was something about creeping around, whispering like spies, and pretending the world was a whole lot scarier than it actually was that made it exciting. One afternoon, After an especially long day of doing nothing much, we decided to go upstairs and investigate one of the rooms. It was the kind of room that always felt off. You know the type, doors that creaked too loudly, a window that let in just enough light to make weird shadows, and a strange stillness that made it seem like it was holding its breath. It wasn't like anything bad had ever happened there, but something about it made our skin crawl. We armed ourselves with our usual tools, a flashlight with half-dead batteries, a fishing net that had seen better days, and a sense of overconfidence that only kids can have. We pressed our backs against the walls like we were sneaking into some enemy base, tiptoeing closer and closer to the door. Every step made the wooden floor creak under our weight, and each sound seemed to echo louder than the last. My cousin shot me a look, one of those, "Are we actually doing this?" glances, and I grinned back, trying to hide the nervous energy in my gut. With a deep breath, we rushed inside. The room was cold, way colder than the hallway we had just come from. I remember the way my arms immediately broke out in goosebumps, like stepping into a freezer on a hot day. The air felt thick, heavy, like it was pushing down on us. But that wasn't the worst part. In the dim light, we saw them. Four pale figures standing near the far corner of the room. They weren't solid, but they weren't exactly see-through either. Just faint outlines of people, barely more than shapes, but definitely there. And the scariest part? They turned to look at us the second we burst in. I can't explain the kind of fear that hit me in that moment. It was like my body forgot how to move. My cousin was frozen too, his hand gripping my arm so tight it hurt. We stood there, staring at them, and they stared right back. They weren't moving, just watching, like we had interrupted something. I don't know how long we stood there. It felt like forever, but it was probably only a few seconds. Eventually, my brain caught up and screamed at me to run. The second I moved, my cousin snapped out of it too, and we bolted out of the room so fast we almost tripped over each other. Down the hallway, down the stairs, straight to the living room where the adults were. We tried to explain what we saw, tripping over our own words, breathless and shaking. Of course, they didn't believe us. "You guys have been watching too many scary movies," my uncle said, shaking his head. My mom told us to stop messing around, but we knew what we saw. We knew that room had always felt weird, and now we knew why. After that day, we stopped going into that room. Not on purpose, really, we just sort of avoided it without thinking. Whenever we walked past, we sped up a little. Whenever we had to go upstairs, we made sure to turn on all the lights. We never saw anything again, and eventually, the fear faded into just another weird childhood memory. Something we talked about every once in a while, usually followed by a, "Do you remember that? That was so weird." But even now, years later, I still think about it. I still wonder what we actually saw. Were they really ghosts? Some kind of trick of the light? A shared hallucination caused by a mix of overactive imaginations and dim lighting? I don't know, and I probably never will. The house has been quiet ever since. No strange sounds at night, no flickering lights, no weird feelings like we used to get. Just a normal old house. And maybe that's what creeps me out the most. Like whatever was there that day left because we saw it. Like we weren't supposed to see them, and we did. I don't go ghost hunting anymore. I don't even really believe in that stuff. But I do know one thing for sure. I never went back into that room alone. And I never will. It was New Year's Eve, and I was home alone. My family had left about an hour ago to visit my grandparents, but thanks to my job refusing to give me the time off, I was stuck here. It wasn't a huge deal. I figured I'd make the best of it. So there I was, feeling rebellious as hell, sitting in the living room, eating a bagel slathered in spray cheese, even though I knew damn well my stomach was going to punish me later for it. Gluten and lactose intolerance be damned. I had the Die Hard movies queued up, volume cranked high, because what better way to bring in the new year than with some classic action? I had just made it to an epic scene, McClane taking out some bad guys in the most ridiculous way possible, when I felt it, the first warning signs, the deep, internal grumble that let me know my stomach was about to wage war. I groaned, knowing I had done this to myself, but there was no avoiding it now. I needed the bathroom, and I needed it fast. I hit pause, grumbling as I stood up, my gut churning in protest. As I made my way to the bathroom, the lights flickered. The wind outside was howling, rattling against the windows, and a heavy snowstorm had been rolling in all day. It wasn't surprising that the power was acting up. I stepped into the bathroom and barely managed to sit down before the lights blinked back on, only to cut out again 3 seconds later. Great. Just great. At least I had my phone, so I turned on the flashlight app and set it on the counter, casting a pale glow across the small room. Then I heard it. A single, soft tap against the bathroom door. I froze. My heart thumped, but I reasoned with myself. The house was old, and with the wind pushing against it, the wood was bound to creak. That had to be it. Another tap, louder this time, then 2 more in quick succession. A shiver crawled up my spine. I grabbed my phone and pointed the flashlight at the door, hesitating before I reached out and opened it quickly. Nothing, just the empty hallway. The dim glow from the living room TV screen flickered at the edge of my vision. I let out a breath and shook my head. I shut the door and sat back down, trying to finish what I had started, when the tapping started again. This time, it was different. A rhythm, a pattern. It took me a second to place it, but my stomach twisted when I realized what it was. The beat to Sound of Truth, by As I Lay Dying. Someone, or something, was drumming their fingers against the door in perfect sync with the song. That was it. That was the moment fear took over. The sheer panic made me clench up, and when my body finally reacted, the force of it sent a splash of freezing toilet water straight up onto my ass. I yelped, nearly launching myself off the toilet as I scrambled to pull my pants up. My pulse was pounding in my ears as I stood there, fists clenched. I didn't know what was on the other side of that door, but I sure as hell wasn't about to sit in the bathroom and wait for it to do something else. I threw the door open, lunging forward like some kind of action hero, ready to confront whatever was there. Nothing. The hallway was empty. The house was silent except for the wind outside and the muffled sound of the TV still playing in the living room. I stood there, heart hammering, my body tense. I waited, listened. Nothing happened. Just the house settling, the wind howling, and my own shaky breath. I turned back toward the bathroom, hesitating before stepping inside again. I didn't want to, but I also knew if I didn't finish what I started, the fear alone might do the job for me. I sat down and, trying to distract myself, I glanced toward the mirror. And that's when I saw it, the single worst thing my eyes had ever beheld. The toilet paper roll was backwards. I let out a nervous laugh, the tension in my chest easing for just a moment. It was stupid, but after everything, it almost felt like some cosmic joke. I finished up and left the bathroom, still feeling on edge, but trying to shake it off. Maybe I was just freaking myself out. I had been alone for hours, hopped up on cheese and action movies. My mind was probably just messing with me. But then it kept happening. The tapping. It wasn't just in the bathroom anymore. It followed me. When I sat back down to watch my movie, I heard it on the wall behind me. When I went into the kitchen to grab a drink, I heard it on the fridge door. When I went to my room to try and sleep, I heard it on my bedroom window. Always the same pattern. Tap, 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 tap. It went on for a full day. Every room I went into, every time I thought I was finally alone, it would start again. By the time my family got back, I was exhausted. I hadn't slept properly, hadn't even been able to focus on anything but the tapping. But the moment they walked through the door, arms full of bags and voices loud with laughter, the tapping stopped. And it never happened again. I never figured out what it was. I checked the house, every inch of it. There were no loose pipes, no branches scraping against the windows, no signs of anything that could explain it. But I know what I heard. And sometimes when I think about that night, I swear I can still feel it, that quiet, rhythmic tapping, just beneath the surface of everything. Like it's waiting. When I was little, I used to cry a lot. I don't mean the normal kind of crying that kids do when they don't get what they want or when they get hurt. I mean the kind of crying that lasted for hours, the kind that kept my parents up at night until eventually they just waited for me to exhaust myself and fall asleep. I don't remember exactly when it started, but I remember the nights themselves. Long, dark, and full of fear. I was scared of something, but I didn't always know what. Sometimes it was just the feeling that something was there, just beyond where I could see. Other times I saw things. One night, I was lying in bed, face hot and sticky with tears, still calling for my mom even though I knew she wasn't coming. I was small, maybe 5, maybe younger. The room was dim, lit only by the weak glow of the night light near my dresser. I was turned onto my side, my blanket pulled up to my chin, trying to calm myself down but failing. Then, through my wet, blurry eyes, I saw them. Two little things, small, with long fingers and bony arms. Their bodies were thin and wiry, and their skin was a sickly gray. Their eyes glowed red in the dim room, not just reflecting light but burning, like hot coals. They didn't just stand there. They moved. They tumbled and spun in the air as if gravity meant nothing to them, like acrobats in a circus. There were no bars, nothing for them to hold on to, but they swung as if invisible trapezes hung in the air. And they laughed. High-pitched, almost like giggling but sharp or cruel. They weren't laughing with joy. They were laughing at me. I screamed. I couldn't stop screaming. My throat burned, and my chest felt tight, but they just kept moving, kept flipping and spinning, their bodies twisting unnaturally, their red eyes locked onto me. I pulled the blanket over my head, squeezing my eyes shut so hard that my head ached. Even then, I swore I could still hear them laughing, still see the red glow behind my eyelids. I don't know how long it lasted, but eventually exhaustion won. My cries faded to hiccups, then to silence. When I woke up in the morning, they were gone. As I got older, I convinced myself it was just a dream, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion, by too many nights spent crying myself to sleep. I never saw them again, but the memory never left me. Even now, I can still picture them perfectly, the way their bodies twisted in the air, the way their eyes glowed. It was real enough to me then. Maybe that was all that mattered. Years passed. The nightmares didn't stop, but they changed. I got older, but sleep never got easier. By the time I reached high school, I had stopped crying at night. That didn't mean the fear had gone away. It had just changed shape. I remember the first time I saw her. It was late. I had been up studying, or maybe just messing around on my phone, anything to put off trying to sleep. The house was dark and quiet. The only light came from the glow of my screen and the faint bluish tint from outside seeping through the curtains. I was sitting on the couch in the living room, half reclined, feeling the heavy pull of exhaustion, but unwilling to move. Then, for no reason at all, I looked up. We had a balcony that overlooked the living room, a wooden railing running along the edge, looking down over the grand piano below. It was a nice house, bigger than what we probably needed, but it never felt comfortable to me. The ceilings were too high, the rooms too open, like there was too much space for things to hide in. She was standing there, a dark silhouette against the dim glow of the upstairs hallway, motionless. A girl in a dress, her head tilted down, her hair hanging forward, just enough for me to see her face. Her eyes. She was looking at me. I froze. My body locked up so fast that I felt a cold, tingling numbness rush through my limbs. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. For a second, I thought I was imagining her, that if I blinked, she would disappear. But she didn't. She just stood there, staring. I ran. My legs moved before I even processed it, carrying me as fast as they could up the stairs, my feet barely making a sound on the carpet. My hands fumbled with the doorknob to my room, and the moment I was inside, I locked it. I stood there, breathless, listening. But there was nothing. It became a routine. Every night, I would see her. She was always in the same spot, staring down at me, her head tilted just slightly, her hair hanging forward but not enough to completely hide her face. At first, I ran every time, slamming my door and locking myself inside. But after a while, something changed. I stopped running. Not because I wasn't scared, but because running didn't change anything. No matter what I did, she was always there. So I started watching. 6 seconds. That was the longest I could go before my body betrayed me, before fear took over and I had to look away. And every time, she would disappear. Not in a dramatic, flickering way. She would just be gone, like she was never there at all. I told myself it was stress, lack of sleep, my brain playing tricks on me, just like when I was little. But I never really believed that, because no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, she always came back. I never told my parents. I never told anyone. Even now, I don't know why. Maybe because saying it out loud would make it real. Or maybe because I knew no one would believe me. One night, I decided to test it. I sat in the living room, waiting. Not doing anything, just waiting. I kept my phone in my lap, my hands pressed against my knees to stop them from shaking. And when I looked up, she was there. This time, I forced myself to stare. 10 seconds. 15. My chest ached. My skin felt like it was crawling, but I didn't look away. And then, for the first time, she moved. Not a lot. Just the slightest tilt of her head, a fraction of an inch. But it was enough. I ran. I locked myself in my room. I didn't come out until morning. After that night, I stopped looking. I never looked at the balcony again. Even now, in every house I've lived in since, I avoid looking at upper landings, balconies, or staircases leading to dark spaces. It's not worth the risk. I don't see her anymore. Maybe because I refuse to look. Maybe because I grew up. Maybe she was never really there to begin with. But the feeling never left. That creeping, cold sensation at the back of my neck, like someone is watching. I know it's not real. I tell myself that every time. But even now, after all these years, I never leave my bedroom door open at night. And I never, ever look up. When I was younger, I used to get sick a lot. Fevers, chills, headaches. Sometimes, when I was burning up, the world around me would feel unreal. The walls of my room would shift in ways they shouldn't. Shadows stretched too long in the dim light. It was during these times that my nightmares would return. It always started the same way. My family and I would be having lunch in a restaurant high above the city. The place was always busy, packed with people. The sound of voices layered on top of each other, cut by the clatter of silverware and plates. The air smelled like food, but I could never tell what kind. It was always blurred, like a dream refusing to focus. I would be eating, looking at my plate, when something made me glance up. That was when I saw him. Across the restaurant, through the crowd, stood a scarecrow. He wasn't like the ones you see in fields, old and tattered, slumping over from the weight of weather and time. No, he was different. His frame was tall and stiff, almost unnatural, like he wasn't just stuffed with hay, but something more. His head was a burlap sack, stitched together crudely, with hollow black holes where his eyes should be. His mouth, a jagged tear in the fabric, gaped open like a wound. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He only stood there, staring at me. Fear hit me hard, like a stone dropped into my stomach. No one else seemed to notice him. My parents, my siblings, the waiters moving around the tables, none of them looked in his direction. It was as if he existed only for me. I knew somehow that I had to get away, that if I didn't, something terrible would happen. I stood up, knocking my chair back, but I didn't run through the restaurant. That would be too easy for him to follow. Instead, I turned to the elevators. I squeezed through the people waiting, frantically pressing the button. The doors slid open, and I rushed inside. The moment they shut, I felt the relief, brief and shallow. Then the elevator began to descend, too fast, like it had been waiting for me. My stomach lifted as the numbers dropped, 20 floors, 30, 50. When the doors opened, I wasn't in a hotel lobby or a shopping mall. I was in a market. It was crowded beyond reason. Stalls packed close together, selling things I didn't recognize. Bright fabrics hung like banners, hiding people from view. The air was thick with heat and smells, spices and sweat, food cooking on open fires. People spoke around me, but their words were foreign, fast, like a tide of noise crashing over me. Then I saw him again. He was there, standing on the other side of the market, just as still, just as unnatural. But now he was closer. I turned and ran. I pushed past people, my breath coming short and panicked. The crowd was thick, slowing me down, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't dare look back, but I could feel him behind me. The scarecrow was moving now, no longer still, and that made it worse. I didn't know how he moved, if he walked or glided or something else entirely. But he was chasing me. The market twisted into alleyways, dark and narrow, the voices fading behind me. The farther I ran, the tighter the spaces became. I didn't know where I was anymore. It was like the market had no end, no way out, just corridors and turns that led nowhere. The fear was unbearable. I knew he was close. I could feel him reaching for me. I could hear the whisper of fabric, the rustle of straw. Then something changed. I heard footsteps, many of them. Fast, rushing toward me. Before I could react, arms grabbed me, lifting me off the ground. I looked up and saw them, my cousins. They had capes, long and flowing, catching the wind as they ran. They didn't speak, didn't stop. They just carried me, flying through the streets, faster than anything should be able to move. I didn't look back. I didn't have to. I knew the scarecrow was still there, but something had shifted. He wasn't following anymore. He wasn't chasing. He was just gone. When I woke up, my body was drenched in sweat, my heart still pounding. The room was dark, my sheets twisted around me. The fear lingered, a shadow in my mind, but I knew something was different. The nightmares never came back. For years, I wondered why. Why had they stopped that night? Why had my cousins appeared, saving me from something I had never been able to escape? They didn't know about the dreams. I had never told them. But somehow, in that strange, fevered world of my nightmares, they had found me. Maybe it was my mind finally fighting back. Maybe I had just outgrown the fear. Or maybe, just maybe, something else had been watching over me, waiting for the right moment to intervene. I'll never know. But one thing is certain. The scarecrow never came back. I don't remember the first time I noticed something was off. It wasn't anything obvious. Just a feeling that the air inside the bakery was heavy, like it was pressing down on me. It wasn't the kind of heavy you get from heat or humidity, but something else. Something that made my skin feel tight and my breath feel short. I ignored it at first. I had work to do, and I wasn't going to let some weird feeling get in the way of that. The bakery was in the in-laws' quarters of a family friend's house. His name was Marco, and he'd been living in that house with his mother for 20 years. She had passed away not long before my mom set up the bakery, and from what I'd heard, Marco wasn't handling it well. He wasn't moving on, wasn't getting rid of her things. I hadn't given it much thought at the time. Grief was personal, and it wasn't my business. I just came in to do my work, rolling dough, baking bread, making sure orders were ready to go. The routine helped keep my mind busy. It was simple, repetitive, and gave me something solid to focus on. It was a normal day when it happened. I had been working for hours, my hands covered in flour, the smell of yeast thick in the air. The kitchen was warm from the ovens, and outside, the light was beginning to change. It was late afternoon, that time of day when the shadows start stretching out, when the golden light of the sun starts shifting into something dimmer, something softer. I was alone in the bakery, but I had been alone in there plenty of times before. It never felt strange. Until that day. I don't even know how to describe it. One moment I was kneading dough, my mind drifting, and the next I was somewhere else. I wasn't actually gone. I was still standing there, still touching the dough, but I wasn't in my own head anymore. My vision flooded with an image of a woman I had never seen before. She was old, her face lined with deep wrinkles, her hair pulled back tight. She was wearing a long dress, dark, old-fashioned, something that looked like it belonged to another time. And she was angry. She was yelling at me. The words came in a rush, overlapping, tumbling over each other. Some of them were in English, but most weren't. Serbian, I think, maybe some Russian mixed in. I couldn't understand everything, but I understood enough. She kept demanding to know where he was. Over and over again. Where is he? Where is he? Her voice was sharp, edged with frustration. It wasn't directed at me exactly. It was like I was just there, caught in it, being used as a conduit. She wasn't asking because she thought I had the answer. She was demanding it from something bigger, from the air itself. I closed my eyes, willing it to stop, but it didn't. The image of her stayed, pressing into me, filling up my head until there was no room for anything else. Everywhere I moved, she followed. Every time I turned, she was there. She wasn't just demanding to know where he was. She was telling me things. He needed to move on. He needed to get rid of the dresses. And he needed to forgive his other siblings. It didn't make sense. I didn't know what dresses she was talking about. I didn't know anything about his family beyond the basics. But I could feel the weight of her words, the urgency behind them. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. My vision cleared. The sound was gone. I was back in the bakery, standing over a slab of dough, my hands trembling. The room was the same, nothing had changed, but I felt different. Lighter, like whatever had been pressing down on me had finally lifted. The air was easier to breathe. I forced myself to keep working, to finish what I had started, but my hands were clumsy, my mind still stuck in that moment. When I finally finished for the day, I went outside, sucking in the cool evening air, trying to shake off the feeling. I needed to tell someone, to say it out loud, to make it real. I found Marco sitting outside, smoking a cigarette. He looked tired. He always looked tired. Something in me hesitated. I wasn't sure how to bring it up, how to explain what had just happened. But I knew I had to. I described the woman to him in as much detail as I could. The way she looked, the dress she was wearing. He didn't say anything while I spoke, just listened, his face unreadable. Then, without a word, he pulled out his phone and scrolled through his photos. He stopped on one and turned the screen toward me. It was her. The same dress, the same face, the same sharp eyes. I knew it. The same dress, the same face, the same sharp eyes. I knew it. The same dress, the same face, the same sharp eyes. I knew it. The same dress, the same face, the same sharp eyes. I knew it. The same dress, the same face, the same sharp eyes. I knew it. The same dress, the same face, the same sharp eyes. I knew it. The same dress, the same face, the same sharp eyes. I knew it. The same dress, the same face, the same sharp eyes. I knew it. The same dress, the same face, the same sharp eyes. I knew it. The same dress, the same face, the same sharp eyes. I knew it. The same dress, the same face, the same sharp eyes. I knew it. The same dress, the same face, the same sharp eyes. I knew it. The same dress, the same face, the same sharp eyes. I knew it. The same dress, the same face, the same sharp eyes. I knew it. The same dress, the same face, the s There was no mistaking it. A cold chill spread through me. I had never seen this woman before in my life. I had never seen this photo, but I knew her. I had seen her, heard her, felt her anger pressing into me. I didn't know what to do with that. Marco exhaled, slow and steady, his cigarette smoke curling into the air. He nodded, just once, like something had clicked into place for him. She always wore that dress, he said, his voice quiet. She loved that dress. I asked him about the things she had said, about him needing to move on, about the dresses. His face darkened. He looked away. I kept all her things, he admitted. Her clothes, her shoes. Couldn't bring myself to get rid of them. He flicked the ash off the end of his cigarette. And my siblings, they screwed me over. Took what they wanted, left me with the mess. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. Everything the woman had shouted at me, everything I had felt was real. I didn't know how or why, but it was real. That was a year ago. I still don't have an explanation for what happened that day. I try not to think about it too much, but it lingers in the back of my mind, a weight that never fully lifts. The bakery is still there, and so is Marco. He eventually got rid of her dresses, donated them somewhere. I don't know if that made a difference. I don't know if that was what she wanted, but it was something. I never saw her again, never heard her voice, never felt that same heavy presence. But I remember, and I know that no matter how much I try to push it aside, I'll never really forget. I was 10 years old when it happened. Just another night, nothing special about it. I was lying in bed, buried under my blankets, my head sinking into the pillow. The house was quiet, just the usual hum of night sounds drifting through, the faint creak of the walls settling, the ticking of the clock in the hallway, the occasional car rolling past outside. Everything was normal. There was nothing to suggest that, within minutes, I'd feel closer to death than I ever had before. I had a bad dream. One of those nightmares that clings to you, that feels real in the moment. My older brother was in it, except it wasn't really him. It was something darker, something wrong. He was strangling me, his hands tight around my throat, squeezing until everything blurred. I remember the crushing pressure, the struggle, the way my lungs screamed for air. It felt too real. My vision darkened at the edges. I was dying, and then I woke up. I remember that instant relief, the way my mind snapped back into reality. My room was the same as always. Familiar shadows stretching across the ceiling, my dresser against the wall, the glow of the streetlight filtering in through my curtains. My heart was pounding, but I told myself it was just a dream, just another nightmare. I took a deep breath to calm myself down, waiting for that cool rush of air to flood my lungs, to bring me back to safety. But it didn't come. I couldn't breathe. There was nothing. No air, no movement in my chest. My throat locked up, as if someone had taken my dream and dragged it into reality. My lungs strained, but they got nothing, not even a whisper of breath. My body jolted with panic, my limbs stiffening. I tried again. Nothing. Again. Still nothing. My hands clawed at my throat, as if I could physically pry open whatever was closing off my airway. But it wasn't something I could touch, something I could fight. It was inside me, and it was winning. My heart was hammering against my ribs. The terror hit fast and hard, white-hot and all-consuming. I was going to die. I knew it. This wasn't like holding your breath underwater, when you know you can come up for air. This was different. There was no air. No way to make it right. My lungs were screaming, my chest convulsing as my body tried to force an oxygen, but there was nothing to take in. I thrashed in my bed, desperate, my mouth opening and closing uselessly. My vision started to pulse at the edges, the world tilting. A ringing noise built up in my ears, a high-pitched, whistling sound. I couldn't think, couldn't focus. Just fear, raw and absolute, swallowing me whole. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a door open. Footsteps, a rush of movement. But I was too far gone, too lost in the rising tide of panic. I barely registered the strong hands gripping my arms, lifting me. I was being moved, carried. My body felt weightless and heavy all at once. Then, suddenly, I was downstairs, though I barely remembered how I got there. The air was different down here, heavier but cooler. I was still gasping, still drowning in open air, but there was a hand on my back, firm, grounding me. My father. He was there. His presence was steady, unshaken, even as I fought against the invisible force strangling me from the inside. He guided me forward, pushing me gently toward the kitchen sink. The sound of running water filled my ears. I didn't understand what he was doing until I felt the dampness against my face, the cold cloth pressed against my skin. It didn't fix anything, but the sensation was sharp enough to pull me back from the edge of blind panic. I tried to focus, to listen, but the sound of my own gasping was deafening. My lungs were still useless, my body still locked in that desperate battle for air. But there was something else now, something different, an awareness. I wasn't alone. I wasn't trapped in my own body, suffocating in the dark. My father was here, and he wasn't panicking. That was the first thing that truly cut through the fear. If he wasn't panicking, maybe, just maybe, I wasn't dying. My muscles were still rigid, every part of me locked in place, but I could feel myself shaking. My hands trembled violently, my arms weak. My body was using every ounce of energy it had just trying to get oxygen, but it wasn't working. And then, finally, I felt something shift. A crack in the dam. A tiny thread of air pushed its way through. It wasn't enough. Nowhere near enough. But it was something. The feeling was sharp, agonizing, like breathing through a straw. My throat burned, every tiny gasp like dragging sandpaper over raw skin. But my body latched onto it, desperate, clinging to the trickle of air. My father was still there, his presence unwavering, guiding me through it. I was still terrified, still shaking, but the worst of it, the absolute certainty that I was going to die, had begun to lift. I wasn't safe yet, but I was fighting. Seconds stretched into eternity. I don't know how long I stood there, gasping in ragged, broken breaths, my body still racked with tremors. But little by little, it eased. The tightness in my chest, the stranglehold in my throat, it loosened. My lungs still ached, my breathing was still shallow, but I could breathe. I wasn't drowning anymore. The panic still clung to me, still hummed under my skin, but the overwhelming, suffocating terror had passed. I stayed in the kitchen for a long time, my father next to me, making sure I was steady. My body was drained, exhausted, my limbs weak and useless. Every breath still felt like work, but at least they were coming in now, one after the other. I knew what had happened. I knew it was an asthma attack, but knowing didn't take away the fear. It didn't erase the memory of that moment when I was certain I was dying. It didn't erase the fact that, for those terrifying few seconds, I truly believed I'd never breathe again. Eventually, I made it back to bed. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of exhaustion sink into me. My throat was sore, my chest heavy, but I was breathing. I closed my eyes, but the fear was still there, lurking just beneath the surface. I didn't want to sleep. Didn't want to slip back into another dream, another nightmare. But sleep pulled at me anyway, the exhaustion too much to fight. The next morning, everything looked the same. The house, my room, the sunlight streaming through the window. Normal, but I wasn't the same. I didn't talk about it much. I didn't know how to put it into words, the way it had felt. The sheer helplessness of it. The absolute certainty that I was about to die. It wasn't the last time it happened either. I had other attacks, but none of them were quite like that one. Because after that night, I knew what it was. I knew what to do. I knew it wouldn't kill me. But that first time, I didn't know. And that made all the difference. Well, most of the times I tell this story, I often get made fun of. It seems quite unreal, I understand that. But I know what I saw. It happened a few years ago when I was staying in a small village in Assam, India. It was a quiet, peaceful place, surrounded by tea plantations and a river running nearby. I was staying in a bungalow with my cousin and some of his friends. The bungalow itself was old, probably built in the colonial era, and though it had been renovated over time, it still had an eerie, old-world charm. That evening was unusually windy. The trees swayed, and there was a constant rustling in the air. The wind howled through the cracks in the windows, and the temperature had dropped significantly. We had all gathered indoors, talking, laughing, and sharing stories. As the night deepened, someone suggested that we should light a fire. It seemed like a great idea at the time. We all moved outside and built a fire near the bungalow, using some dry logs and twigs. The warmth was comforting, and soon enough, someone suggested turning it into a barbecue. The whole evening became a feast. We grilled meat, roasted vegetables, and ate till we were stuffed. I remember feeling full, almost sick from overeating. The warmth of the fire, combined with the cold wind, made everything feel surreal. I needed some air, something to clear my head. The bungalow was situated near a river, and I figured a short walk toward it would help me feel better. So I started walking. At first, I could still hear the laughter and voices of my friends behind me, but as I walked further, the sounds faded into the background. The night was dark, and the only real source of light was the moon, which wasn't full but still bright enough to guide my way. I followed a narrow path that led toward the river. The wind had calmed down a little, but there was still a strange stillness in the air. After walking for what felt like quite a while, I reached the boundary embankment of a tea plantation. The plantation stretched out into the darkness, its neatly arranged rows of tea bushes blending into the shadows. I wasn't exactly sure how far I had walked, but I felt an odd sense of unease. There was no reason for it, no real cause, but something just felt off. The air was heavy, and the silence around me felt unnatural. That's when I saw it. Near the riverbank, in a patch of clayey ground, there was a slightly luminous, jelly-like substance. It wasn't scattered in small amounts. There was a single large cluster of it. The substance had a faint glow, enough to be noticeable, but not enough to fully illuminate the area around it. It was translucent, almost gelatinous, and I could see strange metallic shards embedded within it. The metal pieces were jagged and irregular, like shards of something broken. I felt my stomach tighten. There was no reason for something like this to be here. I had never seen anything like it before. I wasn't drunk, I wasn't hallucinating. I was sure of that. The logical side of my brain kept trying to find an explanation. Maybe some kind of chemical spill. Maybe an unusual type of algae or organic matter. But nothing made sense. The sheer unnatural look of the substance made my skin crawl. I wanted to touch it. I felt the urge to reach out, to see what it felt like, but I stopped myself. Something deep inside me screamed that it was a bad idea. Instead, I bent down, staring at it closely. The metal shards within the jelly reflected the moonlight in an unsettling way. They didn't look like anything I could recognize. Definitely not pieces of a can or any everyday object. I stayed there for a long time, just staring at it. The air around me felt thick, heavy, like it was pressing down on me. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. Finally, I decided I had seen enough. I turned and walked back to the bungalow. When I returned, my friends were still by the fire, drinking and laughing. I told them what I had seen, but they were too tired and drunk to bother coming with me to check it out. One of them joked that I must have seen some weird animal remains or something, but I knew that wasn't the case. I decided to let it go. I would take them to see it in the morning when everyone was sober. The next morning, as soon as the sun was up, I convinced my cousin and a couple of his friends to come with me to the riverbank. The walk felt much shorter in the daylight. The tea plantation looked normal, and the eerie feeling from the previous night was gone. But when we reached the spot where I had seen the jelly-like substance, there was nothing there. Not a single trace. The ground was undisturbed. There were no footprints, no marks, nothing to suggest that anything had been there the night before. The clayey soil should have retained some kind of impression, either from my steps or from whatever that substance was, but it was smooth, completely untouched. My friends looked at me with raised eyebrows. One of them chuckled and said I must have imagined it. I argued, insisting that I had seen it, that it was real. But even I couldn't explain why there was no evidence. The rest of the trip went by without incident, but that night stuck with me. I thought about it for months afterward, trying to make sense of it. I scoured the internet for explanations, reading about bioluminescent algae, chemical reactions, industrial waste, anything that might explain what I had seen. But nothing fit. To this day, I don't know what I saw. Maybe it was something completely normal, something I just didn't understand. Or maybe it was something else, something beyond my comprehension. All I know is that it was real, and I don't think I will ever forget it. I was walking home through the University of Oregon campus late at night after a video shoot. It was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you more aware of every little sound. The neighborhood was safe, or at least that's what I had always believed. I had walked this route plenty of times before without a second thought, but something about this night felt different. I was weighed down with camera gear, expensive stuff that belonged to my friend, plus his laptop. It was a lot to carry, but I didn't mind. I was used to hauling equipment. What I wasn't used to was the kind of situation I was about to find myself in. I noticed him before he noticed me. Just a guy standing off to the side of the sidewalk, shifting from foot to foot. He looked strung out, twitchy, like he was barely holding himself together. Something about him put me on edge. I kept walking, my pace steady, not wanting to draw attention to myself. But it didn't matter. I had already been noticed. I was half a block past him when I heard his voice cut through the stillness. "Hey, get back here." I ignored him. I didn't know him anything, and there was no way I was going to stop and find out what he wanted. I kept my eyes ahead, my grip tightening around the straps of my bags. The street was empty. No one around to step in if things went sideways. My best bet was to keep moving, get to somewhere with lights, somewhere with people. Then I heard footsteps. Fast. Aggressive. He was running. I couldn't run. Not with all this gear. I wasn't about to drop thousands of dollars worth of my friend's equipment, either. Instead, I turned around and started walking backward, keeping my eyes on him. He was close now, his body jerking forward in bursts, like he wasn't fully in control of his own movements. His eyes were wide, wild, locked onto me. He reached out, lunging at my bags. I twisted, yanking them away from his grasp, but he kept coming. I turned and ran as much as I could, my legs burning from the weight I carried. He was right behind me, too close, too fast. I spotted the glow of the Safeway parking lot up ahead. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than the empty sidewalk. At least there would be lights, maybe even someone inside the store. Before I could make it, I felt a violent tug. My laptop bag. His hands locked onto the strap, yanking hard enough that I nearly lost my balance. "You're about to get knocked out," he said, his voice low, unhinged. I didn't think. I reacted. My free hand went to my pocket, fingers wrapping around the utility knife I always carried. Not big, but sharp enough. Intimidating enough. I flicked it open, the sound loud in the night air, and held it out between us. "Get the fuck out of here." He didn't even flinch. His pupils were blown wide, his breathing erratic. He was too gone to care, too desperate, too wired. He lunged again. This time, I closed the knife, then snapped it back open right in front of his face. The click finally registered. His eyes flickered with something like recognition. Then he let go and staggered back. "My boys are close," he spat, his voice filled with a twisted kind of glee. He turned and ran, disappearing around the corner. But the way he said it, the way he laughed as he ran, made my stomach drop. I wasn't safe yet. I bolted toward Safeway. My legs screamed in protest, my heart hammering so hard I could barely hear anything else. As I reached the parking lot, I risked a glance over my shoulder. There they were, for maybe 5 guys coming around the corner, moving fast. I didn't wait to count. I sprinted into the store, my lungs burning, my whole body buzzing with adrenaline. The bright lights inside felt almost unreal, too harsh after the darkness outside. A few people milled around, oblivious, going about their late-night grocery runs. No one looked at me. No one noticed the way I was shaking, the way I kept glancing at the entrance, waiting for them to follow. I pulled out my phone and called my friend. My hands were slick with sweat as I gripped it tight, pressing it to my ear. "Come get me. Now." I gave him the address. He didn't ask questions. He just said he was on his way. Minutes passed, but they felt like hours. I stayed near the front of the store, pretending to browse, pretending I wasn't watching the entrance like my life depended on it. The guys never came in. Maybe they saw the cameras. Maybe they weren't stupid enough to try something in a store full of people. Or maybe they were just waiting. When my friend pulled up, I moved fast. Out the door, into the car, locks engaged before I even got my seatbelt on. I didn't exhale until we were blocks away. I told him everything. He didn't say much, just shook his head, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. We both knew how close that had been. I never walked that route alone again. You think you're safe until you're not. You think you know a place until the shadows move in just the right way, and suddenly it's different. That night changed something in me. A switch flipped. Now I pay more attention. I carry more than just a knife, and I never assume I'm alone. I don't know when it started exactly. I only know that, for most of my childhood, I never felt completely in control of myself. There were nights I'd wake up in a different room, or standing in a hallway, or sitting up in bed with no memory of how I got there. Sometimes I'd wake up sweating, out of breath, my heart slamming in my chest, as if I had just been running or fighting something in my sleep. But the worst part wasn't the sleepwalking itself. It was what I did during the blackouts. My mother was the first to notice, though she never spoke much about it. She'd tell me the next morning that she'd heard me moving around in the middle of the night. At first, she thought I was just going to the bathroom or getting water. But then she'd find things out of place, a chair knocked over, doors left open that she knew she had closed, objects on the floor that shouldn't have been there. At one point, she started locking my bedroom door from the outside, not because she wanted to trap me in, but because she was afraid of what I might do if I wandered too far. I wasn't just walking around in my sleep. I was acting, moving, talking, and I knew things I shouldn't have known. The first time I remember something truly strange happening, I was around 7 years old. I had fallen asleep on the floor of my bedroom, playing with my toys. My older brother came in to get me for dinner, and when he opened the door, something took over me. I don't know how to explain it, but it was as if I was awake inside my own body, but I couldn't control it. I saw him standing there, calling my name, but I didn't respond the way I should have. Instead, I sat up, grabbed the nearest thing next to me, a plastic coat hanger, and started slamming it against the floor. My brother stepped back, startled. I kept hitting the ground, over and over, until my mother came rushing in and grabbed my arm. I didn't fight her, but I didn't speak either. She told me later that my eyes were wide open, but I looked right through her, like I wasn't really there. After a few minutes, I dropped the hanger and stood up like nothing had happened. I went to dinner. I don't remember feeling strange or tired. To me, it was like waking up from a nap and just continuing on with my day. 3 years later, it happened again. Different brother, same situation. I had fallen asleep playing in my room, and when he came to wake me, I did the exact same thing, grabbed a coat hanger and pounded the floor with it. The moment it was over, I was fine. I sat down at the dinner table like nothing happened, while my brother stared at me like I was some kind of freak. As I got older, the blackouts changed. They weren't always just moments of sudden movement. Sometimes they were violent. When I was about 14, I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of my mother yelling my name. My room was in chaos. My dresser drawers had been pulled out and dumped on the floor. My blankets were ripped off my bed. The closet door had deep scratches on it, like I had been pounding on it with my fists. And my door, the one that was locked from the outside, was shaking. I had been hitting it so hard that my mother thought someone was trying to break out. When she opened the door, she said I stopped instantly. I turned around, looked at her, and then climbed into bed like nothing had happened. After that, she stopped locking my door. I think she was too scared to deal with it anymore. I didn't understand why this was happening to me. I wasn't sick. I didn't have any history of sleep disorders, at least none that had been diagnosed. I wasn't under any more stress than a normal kid. But every few years, something inside me would snap during the night, and I'd lose control. The strangest part of all of it was what I remembered during the blackouts. It wasn't like regular sleepwalking, where you wake up with no recollection of what you've done. I remembered everything. I just couldn't stop myself. I remembered looking at my brother and feeling like he was a stranger. I remembered feeling my body move without my control, my muscles tensing, my hands gripping whatever object was closest. I remembered my own voice speaking words I hadn't thought of, saying things I had no reason to know. One time, when I was about 16, I remember having a full conversation with someone while blacked out. I don't know who they were, but I could feel myself talking, responding, laughing even. But when I woke up, there was no one there. I was standing in the middle of my room, alone, my hands trembling. After that, it started happening less and less. By the time I turned 20, the blackouts had stopped completely. It's been 6 years since the last one. I don't know why it stopped. I don't know why it started in the first place. My mother used to say she thought I was possessed, but I don't believe in anything like that. There was no ghost in my house, no demon lurking in the shadows. There was only me. I don't know if it'll ever happen again. Maybe I just grew out of it. Maybe my brain finally fixed whatever was broken inside of me. Or maybe it's still there, buried somewhere deep, waiting for the right moment to come back. I don't like to think about it too much, because if it does come back, I don't know if I'll be able to stop it this time. When I was in high school, a little over 10 years ago, I volunteered with a friend to watch kids at a local church daycare during an evening service. The event was later than usual, likely a service followed by a dinner gathering. The daycare was split into 2 rooms. One was a snack room with a small kitchenette, and the other was the playroom where most of the kids spent their time. After the kids had their snacks, They ran off to the playroom with the other volunteer, while I stayed behind to clean up. I wiped down the tables, put away the juice boxes, and swept up crumbs from the floor. One little girl, around 3 or 4 years old, wanted to stay with me. I handed her an extra cracker to keep her busy while I tidied up. She sat at the table, munching quietly, her little feet swinging beneath the chair. Every now and then, I heard her mumbling to herself, but I didn't think much of it. Kids talked to themselves all the time when they played. The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The air smelled faintly of apple juice and graham crackers. Outside, beyond the small, high-set windows, the night was already deep. I could hear the muffled sounds of voices from the service still going on in the main part of the church. The heater clicked on, filling the quiet room with a low, steady hum. I focused on my cleaning, gathering used napkins, and wiping away the last sticky spots on the table. Then, without warning, the girl started sobbing. Not the quiet, tired kind of crying, but a full-body, heartbroken wail. Huge tears streaked down her cheeks, and cracker crumbs spilled from her mouth as she sobbed uncontrollably. My first thought was that she had bitten her tongue or gotten sick, so I rushed to her side, lifting her into my arms. Her small body shook against me as I tried to calm her down, gently checking her face for any sign of injury. Her mouth was fine, no blood, no swollen lip. Her hands weren't pinched or hurt. She was physically okay, but something had clearly terrified her. Her tiny hands gripped the fabric of my shirt as she cried against my shoulder. I rubbed her back, still confused about what had caused the sudden outburst. The daycare room was empty except for the two of us. The other kids were in the playroom, laughing and chattering just beyond the closed door. The sound of their play felt distant compared to the raw distress coming from the girl in my arms. As I held her, trying to soothe her, I felt a strange prickling sensation at the back of my neck, a crawling unease that had no obvious source. My pulse quickened slightly, though I told myself it was just the shock of her sudden breakdown. I whispered reassurances, telling her she was okay, but she kept sobbing, her breath hitching in ragged gasps. Then, in between her heaving cries, she choked out words that sent a chill through me. "That boy won't stop picking on me." I stiffened. My grip on her tightened slightly as I instinctively glanced around the room. There was no boy. There was no one. The two of us were alone in the snack room. The tables and chairs sat undisturbed, the counter was wiped clean, and the only sound aside from her crying was the dull hum of the heater. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. The girl continued sobbing, lifting one trembling hand and pointing toward the farthest corner of the room. My stomach knotted as I followed her gesture. The corner was empty. The paint on the walls was slightly discolored, a faint yellowing from years of wear, but there was nothing there, no movement, no sound. Just an empty space. My brain raced to make sense of what she was saying. Maybe she was confused. Maybe she had imagined a game still going on in her head from earlier. Maybe she had been thinking about something that happened earlier in the day. But the raw fear in her cries didn't feel like a misunderstanding. It felt real. Too real. The air in the room suddenly felt heavier, pressing against my skin. The heater clicked again, and a shudder ran down my spine. I wasn't the kind of person who scared easily, but something about the whole situation made my instincts scream that something wasn't right. The girl buried her face in my shoulder, hiccuping through her sobs, still pointing toward that same empty corner as if something unseen lingered there. I wasn't going to stay in that room any longer. I stood, adjusting her weight in my arms, and carried her into the playroom where the other kids and the volunteer were. The bright noise of the playroom was an immediate contrast to the eerie stillness of the snack room. The fluorescent lights seemed brighter here, the sounds of laughter and chatter grounding me back in normalcy. I set the girl down, her sobs easing now that she was surrounded by other children. She sniffled, rubbing at her wet cheeks with her sleeves, and slowly backed away to sit near one of the other kids. I stood there for a moment, my skin still prickling with unease. My friend, the other volunteer, gave me a questioning look, but I just shook my head. I wasn't sure what to say. I wasn't even sure what had just happened. I told myself it was just a weird kid moment, just an overactive imagination paired with exhaustion. But something in the back of my mind wouldn't let it go. The way she had pointed, the fear in her voice, the way the air had felt different, heavier, as if something unseen was watching. I stayed in the playroom for the rest of the night, avoiding the snack room as much as possible. When the event ended and the parents came to pick up their children, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. As soon as the last kid was gone, I grabbed my things, said a quick goodbye to my friend, and left the church without looking back. I never volunteered there again. Even now, years later, I still remember that night. I don't believe in ghosts or anything like that. I don't try to make sense of what happened. But something about that moment, in that quiet snack room with the hum of the heater and the fluorescent lights flickering softly overhead, still lingers in my memory unresolved. I was about 16 at the time. I had this habit of sleeping with the covers pulled over my head, leaving just a small hole to breathe out of. It was something I'd done since I was a kid, made me feel safe. The darkness under the covers felt like my own little world, separate from whatever might be lurking outside. My bedroom always felt a little off to me, like it had a presence of its own. I never liked sleeping with the door closed either, so it always stayed open just a crack. That night, everything was normal. I went to bed at my usual time, pulled the covers over my head, and drifted off. At some point in the night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Slow, steady steps, the kind that made the floorboards creak just slightly. It wasn't something that worried me at first. My dad got up almost every night around the same time to use the bathroom and get a drink. The sound of him walking down the hall was something I'd heard hundreds of times before, so I barely thought about it. But then the footsteps stopped, right at my door. I frowned under the covers, still half asleep. That was weird. Normally, I'd hear the sound of him going into the bathroom or walking back to his room. But there was nothing now, just silence. I waited a few seconds, expecting to hear movement again, but there was nothing. The air felt heavier somehow, thick in a way that made my chest tighten. My heart picked up a little, but I told myself it was just Dad, maybe pausing for some reason. Maybe he was checking in on me. I peeked my head out from under the covers, squinting into the darkness of my room. The hallway light was off, but there was just enough light from outside to see the faint outline of my open doorway. "Dad!" I called out, my voice low and groggy. The response I got was not what I expected. A slow, soft breath. A long, drawn-out exhale. H-H-H-H-H-H. It wasn't a sigh. It wasn't the normal sound of someone breathing. It was controlled, deliberate. It sent a bolt of ice straight through my chest. Before I could think, I yanked the covers back over my head, pulling them tight around me like a shield. My hands were shaking. My breathing was fast and shallow. I squeezed my eyes shut, listening, waiting for anything else. Nothing. Just silence again. I lay there for what felt like forever, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Just my imagination. Maybe I'd misheard. Maybe my dad had actually walked away, and I'd just imagined the sound. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The sound had been right there, just outside my door. After what must have been a full minute of just lying there, I forced myself to move. Slowly, cautiously, I peeled back the covers and looked again. There was someone standing in my doorway. A white figure, featureless. No face, no clothes I could make out, just a shape, standing there, motionless. My breath caught in my throat. My entire body locked up. I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink. It was like my brain refused to process what I was looking at. Every single instinct I had screamed at me to do something, to run, to hide, to scream. But I couldn't. I just lay there, frozen, staring. I don't know how long I stayed like that. It felt like hours. My chest ached from how hard my heart was pounding. My ears rang with silence. I kept expecting it to move, to step closer, to do something. But it never did. It just stood there. Eventually, finally, I blinked, and when I opened my eyes again, it was gone. No footsteps. No sound of it walking away. Just gone. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I stayed under my covers, my entire body rigid with fear, eyes darting around the room at every little sound. Every shadow looked like something waiting to move. Every creak of the house made my skin crawl. I couldn't shake the feeling that if I looked again, it would be there. The first rays of morning light were the only thing that made me move again. As soon as I could hear my parents stirring, I got up, heart still hammering in my chest. I went straight to them, trying to keep my voice calm. "Were either of you at my doorway last night?" I asked, forcing a small laugh, like it was some joke. They both looked at me, confused. My mom frowned. "No, we slept through the whole night." "Why?" I just shook my head. "No reason." I never told them. Never told anyone, actually, until now. It never happened again, nothing like that, anyway. But even now, Years later, I still think about it. I still remember the feeling of something standing there, watching. I still remember that breath. And I still sleep with the covers over my head. The night air was thick with warmth, the kind that made it impossible to stay indoors without feeling suffocated. It had been an uneventful evening, just me and my friend talking online, both of us restless and bored. It must have been around 1 or 2 in the morning, well past the time most people would even consider going outside, let alone heading into the woods. But the idea came to me like a spark. Why not go for a swim? The lake was close, maybe a 20-minute walk from my house, and the water was always warm in the summer. It seemed like the perfect way to cool off, something spontaneous to break the monotony of the night. My friend didn't hesitate to agree. We both had nothing better to do, and the idea of sneaking out into the forest in the dead of night added a small thrill to the plan. We met up near my house, dressed lightly since the heat still lingered even this late. The streets were quiet, the kind of quiet that only exists in the middle of the night when the world is still. There were no cars, no distant voices, just the hum of insects and the occasional rustling of leaves in the warm breeze. Once we reached the edge of the forest, the atmosphere shifted. The trees loomed tall and black against the sky, their dense canopy blocking out most of the moonlight. We had to rely on our phones to see where we were stepping. The dirt path leading to the lake was narrow and uneven, roots twisting across it like veins. We walked in silence for most of the way, our footsteps barely making a sound against the packed earth. Occasionally, I would hear something rustling in the undergrowth, probably just a small animal, but in the dead of night, every little sound felt amplified. Eventually, the trees thinned out, revealing the lake in front of us. The water was dark, almost pitch black, reflecting the faint glow of the sky. It was eerily still, with only the occasional ripple disturbing its surface. The place was completely deserted, no campers, no other night swimmers. We were alone. We set our things down near the shoreline and took out the flashlight. Since we planned to swim out quite far, we agreed to leave it on, pointed towards the water, so we could find our way back easily. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a small patch of the lake and the ground where our clothes lay. Without wasting much time, we stripped down to our swim shorts and stepped into the water. The moment I waded in, I felt the familiar unease creeping up my spine. I've always had a fear of deep water. Something about not being able to see what was beneath me made my skin crawl. But I pushed it aside. I wasn't about to back out now. We swam out, further and further, until we were at least 50 meters from shore. The water was warm, just as I had expected, but that didn't make it any less unsettling. It was different at night. Something about the darkness surrounding us made the lake feel bigger, deeper, endless. I kept glancing down, even though I knew I wouldn't be able to see anything. The thought of something moving beneath me, unseen, made my heart race. Then, as we floated in place, catching our breath, something happened that made my stomach drop. The flashlight on the shore flickered. Once, twice, then it stayed on. My eyes locked onto it, my breath hitching in my throat. Someone had walked past it. I turned to my friend, but I didn't need to say anything. I could tell he had seen it too. My muscles tensed, every nerve in my body screaming at me to move, to swim back immediately. But we stayed frozen, waiting, watching. Nothing happened. The forest was silent. Minutes passed. It felt like forever. Eventually, we decided to make our way back to land. We moved quickly but quietly, our strokes breaking the stillness of the water. I couldn't shake the feeling of something watching us, but the shore was getting closer. When we reached the edge, we wasted no time pulling ourselves out. I felt exposed standing there, dripping and vulnerable in the open. We dressed as fast as we could, barely speaking, both of us just wanting to leave. But then, just as I reached down to grab the flashlight, I saw it. A shoe. It was sitting right next to the flashlight, half in the dirt, half in the grass. A single shoe that hadn't been there before. It was old-looking, dirty, like it had been out there for a while. But the thing that made my skin prickle was that it hadn't been there when we arrived. My heart pounded against my ribs. I looked around, scanning the trees, the path, anywhere someone could be hiding. But there was nothing. No sound, no movement. Just the oppressive silence of the forest. I grabbed the flashlight with a shaking hand, and without another second of hesitation, we left. We didn't run, but we walked fast, barely looking back. The whole way home, I felt an overwhelming sense of being followed, like something unseen was just out of view, moving through the trees alongside us. When we finally reached my neighborhood, we stopped to catch our breath. My friend looked as shaken as I felt. We didn't talk much, just mumbled a quick goodbye before going our separate ways. I barely slept that night. I kept thinking about the flashlight flickering, about the shoe, about the fact that someone somewhere had been out there with us, watching. To this day, we still talk about that night, and every time, the same uneasy feeling creeps back in. I don't know who was out there. I don't know if they were just passing through, or if they had been waiting, watching us the entire time. All I know is that I haven't been back to that lake at night since, and I don't plan to ever again. I never really believed in ghosts or the supernatural. I always figured there was a reasonable explanation for everything, and if there wasn't, it just meant we didn't understand it yet. But there was one night at my grandma's house that still sticks with me. I can't explain it. I don't know if I imagined it, if my half-asleep brain made it all up, or if something else happened, something I'll never really understand. My granddad died about 4 years ago, an aneurysm, sudden and unexpected. It happened in the dining/living room, only a few meters away from where I always have to sleep whenever we visit. There's only so much space in the house, and since I'm the youngest, I always end up on the sofa. I've gotten used to it over the years. When I was younger, it used to creep me out, the pitch darkness, the silence, the feeling of being alone in that big old house. My grandma lives in the middle of an orchard in Kent. When I say it's dark at night, I mean it's the kind of darkness you don't really get in a city. No streetlights, no cars going by, just total blackness. If you wake up in the middle of the night, you can't even see your hand in front of your face. The air feels heavy, thick with quiet. The only sound is the occasional rustling of trees when the wind picks up, or maybe the distant hoot of an owl. That night, everything was normal at first. We had dinner, sat around talking for a while, and then everyone went to bed. My grandma's dog, an old but sharp-eared little thing, went upstairs with her like he always did. I got comfortable on the sofa, wrapped myself in the blankets, and eventually drifted off. At some point in the night, I woke up. I wasn't sure why at first. I wasn't cold. I didn't need the bathroom. I just opened my eyes and lay there for a few moments, staring into the blackness, trying to figure out what had pulled me out of sleep. Then I heard it, the dog. He was upstairs at the top of the staircase, barking. Not a normal bark, not the half-hearted woof he'd give when he heard a noise outside. This was frantic, loud, sharp. I turned onto my back, fully awake now. The barking didn't stop. It only got worse, more urgent. It was strange because he wasn't coming downstairs. Normally, if he was upset about something, he'd come running down to check it out, sniffing around, making sure everything was fine. But this time, he stayed up there, as if he was too scared to move. And then, through the silence, the cuckoo clock started. It was an old thing, a gift from years ago. It barely worked anymore. It would chime at the wrong times, sometimes skip hours entirely. But now, in the middle of the night, right as the dog was going mad, it started up. The sound of the little mechanical bird echoed through the house. I was half sitting up now, heart pounding for no reason I could understand. That's when I felt it. A presence. I don't know how else to describe it. It was like something was behind me. Not just behind me, but moving toward me. I froze. My whole body tensed up. I wasn't even breathing properly, just small, shallow breaths. It was the strangest feeling, like the air had changed, like there was something pushing towards me through the darkness. It was slow but steady, not stopping, not hesitating. I couldn't hear anything, couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. A weight in the air. A shift. At first, I didn't react. It was like my brain refused to process what was happening. Then all at once, it was right above me. I felt this overwhelming pressure, like something was looming over my head, just inches away. That was when I snapped out of it. I twisted around as fast as I could, heart hammering, but there was nothing. Just darkness. The same pitch-black nothingness as before. But the feeling was gone. Whatever had been there had pulled back. It was retreating, like it had never been that close to begin with. And as I lay there, trying to calm my breathing, I realized something else. The cuckoo clock had stopped. And the dog, he had gone completely silent. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling ridiculous and confused, and more than anything, unsettled. I kept trying to come up with a logical explanation. Maybe the dog had just been barking at a fox outside. Maybe the cuckoo clock had chimed randomly, like it sometimes did. Maybe I had just imagined the feeling of something being there, my brain caught in the space between sleep and wakefulness. But I couldn't shake it. The next morning, my grandma mentioned that the dog had never barked like that before. She joked that maybe he saw a ghost. I laughed along with her, but I didn't tell her what had happened. I didn't tell anyone, because I still don't know what to say about it. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in the afterlife. But that night made me think about things I never really thought about before. I was close to my granddad. I was the first boy in the family. He always made a big deal about that. We spent so much time together when I was younger. I don't know if any of that means anything. Maybe it was all in my head. Maybe it wasn't. All I know is, that night, for the first time in my life, I wondered if there are things we just aren't meant to understand. My aunt had just passed away. It didn't feel real yet. I sat in my room for what felt like hours, staring at nothing, my mind running in circles. I wasn't someone who believed in the supernatural, but grief does strange things to people. My head felt heavy, my body drained. Eventually, I convinced myself that sleep would be the best thing for me. It wouldn't fix anything, but at least it would make the time pass. I turned off the lamp on my nightstand and rolled onto my side, facing the wall. My dog, a calm and quiet one by nature, lay in his usual spot near my bed. The room was silent except for the hum of the fan in the corner, a sound that usually helped me sleep. I don't know how much time passed before I felt my dog shift. At first, I ignored it. Dogs move around in their sleep all the time. But then I heard it, a low, rumbling growl. Not loud, but deep. A warning. It pulled me from the edge of sleep instantly. My dog never growled. Ever. I opened my eyes, still facing the wall, my pulse picking up. Maybe he just heard something outside. That had to be it. I didn't move at first. I just listened. The wind against the window. The occasional creak of the house settling. But the growling continued. Slow and steady, his throat vibrating with something I couldn't see. I turned over. He was sitting up, ears perked, body tense. His eyes were locked on the door. I followed his gaze, my own eyes still blurry from tears. There was something there. A shape. A dark figure standing in the doorway. My breath caught in my throat, and I blinked hard. My head was still heavy, exhaustion clouding my thoughts. My eyes had to be playing tricks on me. I wiped at my face and looked again, but the shape was still there. My dog's growling hadn't stopped. I swallowed hard, feeling my pulse in my ears. I sat up, my body stiff, trying to convince myself that it was nothing. Maybe my vision was still adjusting to the darkness. Maybe my brain was fogged from grief. I didn't move closer. I didn't say anything. I just sat there, staring, waiting for my dog to calm down. After what felt like minutes, the growling faded. My dog lay back down, but didn't take his eyes off the door. I took that as a sign that whatever I thought I saw wasn't real. I laid back down, forcing my eyes shut, telling myself I was exhausted and seeing things. I don't know how long I slept. It couldn't have been long. Something woke me up again, my dog, growling just like before. I felt the same tension in the air, that thick, suffocating stillness that made my skin crawl. And then I heard it. A voice. Low. Quiet. Right by my door. Goodbye, JR. Every hair on my body stood up. My stomach dropped. I shot up in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. My eyes darted around the room, but I saw nothing. No movement. No shadow. Just the open doorway leading to the dark hall. My dog was still growling, his body rigid. I swung my legs over the bed, standing up so fast I felt dizzy. My breath came in short, uneven bursts. The house was empty. No one else was home. I knew that for a fact. I scanned the room, looking for anything, any explanation. My brain raced, trying to rationalize it. Maybe I was dreaming. Maybe the grief had gotten to me more than I thought. I told myself it was my own mind playing tricks, but I didn't believe it. Then I noticed the balloons. They had been sitting in the corner of my room, tied together from something earlier that week. I hadn't touched them since. But now, one had broken free. I watched, frozen, as it drifted slowly around the room. Not floating up toward the ceiling like a balloon should, but moving in a slow, deliberate circle, as if something unseen was guiding it. I wanted to dismiss it as coincidence, but I couldn't. The knot that held the balloons together was still tight. There was no way one had just slipped free on its own. The room felt colder, heavier. My skin prickled with something I couldn't explain. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up in bed, my back against the wall, my dog curled up beside me. He had stopped growling, but his body remained tense, his ears flicking at every little sound. Morning came slowly. The first hints of light through the window did little to ease the unease sitting in my chest. I told myself again and again that it had all been in my head, that grief and exhaustion had twisted my senses. That's what I had to believe. But when I finally stood up and walked toward the door, I felt that same weight in the air. I glanced at the spot where the shape had stood the night before. Nothing was there. Of course, nothing was there. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been. I took the balloons and threw them away. It felt stupid, but I didn't care. I didn't tell anyone what happened. There was no point. What would I even say? That my dog saw something I didn't? That I heard a voice in an empty house? That a balloon moved when it shouldn't have? No one would believe it. Hell, I barely believed it. But I knew what I heard, and I knew what I saw, and I would never forget it. The day we moved started early, the kind of morning where the sun is up, but the air is still cold. My family had already packed most of our things, and the moving truck had just arrived. I was standing outside as the movers got out of the truck, stretching and shaking off the long drive. They seemed friendly, the kind of guys who do this every day and know the drill by heart. The driver was chatting with me, just small talk about the road, how far we were moving, how long it would take. Then he stopped. At first, I thought he had just lost his train of thought, but his eyes locked onto mine, wide, staring, like he was seeing something that wasn't there. His mouth twitched, and this strange noise came out, a sharp, cracking sound, almost like a laugh, but twisted. It wasn't normal. I felt my stomach drop, and before I could even ask if he was okay, he started moving in a way that no one should be able to move. His body tilted, his knees buckled, but instead of falling straight down, he bent sideways, his arms rigid, hands clawing at nothing. He collapsed onto the stairs behind him. It wasn't a hard fall, more like he was being lowered in slow motion, his body folding strangely, his head landing softly on the carpeted step. The noise kept coming from his mouth, his lips barely moving. It was all happening too fast for me to react. I just stood there, my hands cold, my heart hammering in my chest. One of the other movers, a guy who looked like he had seen this before, was on him in seconds. "Seizure," he said, already turning the driver onto his side. I hadn't moved. I could hear my mom calling for my dad inside the house, and everything felt like it had slowed down. I don't know how long it took for the ambulance to get there, but it felt like forever. The driver's breathing was uneven, his body stiff one moment, jerking the next. The other mover was calm, making sure he didn't hurt himself, talking to him even though he wasn't responding. I felt useless, just standing there, watching something I didn't understand, something I couldn't help with. When the paramedics arrived, they moved quickly, like they had done this 1,000 times before. They checked his pulse, his breathing, asked us what had happened. By then, the seizure had passed, and he was lying still, eyes half open, looking confused. He didn't seem to know where he was. One of the paramedics knelt beside him, speaking softly, telling him he had a seizure, asking if he had any history of them. He shook his head slightly, still dazed. The paramedics took him to the hospital, just to be safe. And that's when it hit us. This was the guy who was supposed to drive our entire life across the country. Everything we owned was going in that truck. And if he had another seizure while driving, my parents looked at each other. My dad rubbed his face, trying to think. We didn't know what to do. The company had sent him, but we had no idea if they even knew he had seizures. Did he know? Was this a one-time thing? No one had answers, not even him. For hours we waited. The other movers kept working, loading up our furniture, the boxes we had spent weeks packing. They talked among themselves, but didn't say much to us. There was nothing to say. I kept checking my phone, waiting for a call, an update, anything. My mom kept pacing. My dad kept looking at his watch. The truck was half loaded, and we didn't even know if it would be making the trip. When we finally got the call, it was a relief and a new kind of fear all at once. The hospital had checked him over, run some tests. No history of seizures. No explanation. They cleared him to go. Said he was fine. The moving company said he was good to drive. But how could we be sure? We didn't have a choice. The move had to happen, and there was no backup driver. My parents had a long talk with him when he came back. He looked tired but seemed normal again. Apologetic. Embarrassed. He assured them he felt fine, that the doctors hadn't found anything, that it was probably just stress, lack of sleep. He said he'd been driving for years and never had a problem. In the end, we let him go. We had to. He got behind the wheel, and we watched our entire life pull away, still not sure if we had made the right choice. The next few days were tense. We drove separately, taking our own route, arriving ahead of the truck. Every time the phone rang, I half expected it to be bad news, but it never was. When the truck finally pulled up to our new house, I think we all exhaled for the first time in days. The driver stepped out, smiling, tired but fine. He shook my dad's hand, apologized again. My parents thanked him. He had made it. We had made it. Looking back, I still don't know what happened that day. Maybe it was a freak incident, something that would never happen again. Maybe he just got lucky. But I do know one thing. That morning, for those few terrifying moments, I saw something I will never forget. A person losing control of their own body, their own mind, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. It stuck with me. Still does. Because sometimes things just happen, and you don't get an answer. You just move forward, hoping for the best, knowing that, for whatever reason, you got through it. That's all you can do. It was late autumn when I moved into that old house for my placement year. The place was a bit rundown, the kind of house that always felt a little too cold no matter how high you turned up the heating. It had tall, thin windows that rattled when the wind picked up, and the floorboards creaked even when no one was walking on them. I was sharing it with 3 other people, 2 girls and 1 guy, all working at the same company as me. We weren't exactly close, but we got along well enough. The guy, Mark, had the only bedroom on the ground floor, right near the front door. The rest of us, Sarah, Emily, and I, were upstairs. The staircase groaned under our weight every time we went up or down. There was something unsettling about that house, but I chalked it up to just being an old building and the fact that I was still getting used to a new place. The first couple of months passed without anything too unusual happening. We settled into a routine: work, dinner, occasional drinks together, then bed. Nothing out of the ordinary, just regular life. But then one night, everything changed. It must have been around 2 or 3 in the morning when I woke up to a loud banging sound. It was a deep, heavy thud, rhythmic, like someone pounding on the front door with their fist, or maybe even their whole body. My heart was immediately in my throat. I sat up in bed, straining to listen. The banging continued, growing more frantic. Then came the screaming. It was a woman's voice, high-pitched, desperate. "Help me. Please. Let me in. They're coming. Please, oh God." I froze. My stomach twisted. Something about the way she was screaming felt wrong. It wasn't just fear. It was exaggerated, almost performative, but also chillingly real. I grabbed my phone and called Sarah. She picked up instantly, whispering, "Are you hearing that?" "Yeah. Wake Emily. Come to my room. Now." Within seconds, the 2 of them were in my room, locking the door behind them. We stood there in the dark, listening. The pounding on the door grew louder. The woman outside kept crying for help, her voice cracking and breaking as she begged. My whole body was shaking. We tried calling Mark. No answer. The worst part, the front door had 2 narrow glass panels on either side. If we went downstairs, we'd have to walk past them. If someone was looking in, they'd see us. That thought alone was enough to keep us glued in place, holding our breath, hoping the woman would just go away. But she didn't. She kept screaming, kept hammering on the door. The whole house felt like it was vibrating under the force of it. Every second stretched into eternity. My mind raced. What if she really was in trouble? What if she was being chased? But something in my gut told me not to go near that door. Something felt wrong, even beyond the terror I was feeling. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the banging stopped. The screaming cut off mid-sob. The silence that followed was almost worse. We stood there, hardly daring to breathe, ears straining for any hint of movement outside. But there was nothing. We didn't sleep that night. The 3 of us huddled together in my room until the first rays of sunlight crept through the blinds. Only then did we muster the courage to go downstairs. Mark was already in the kitchen, making coffee like nothing had happened. He looked up at us, bleary-eyed. "What's up with you lot?" "Did you not hear that?" Emily asked, her voice shaking. "Hear what?" I couldn't believe it. The noise had been deafening. There was no way he could have slept through it. But he just shrugged, looking uncomfortable, and muttered something about being a deep sleeper. I could see the lie on his face. He had heard it. He had just been too scared to come out, just like we were. That would have been the end of it. A terrifying, unexplained night that we'd all eventually chalk up to paranoia. But a few weeks later, I came across a newspaper article that made my blood run cold. There had been a string of robberies in the area. The method? A distressed woman banging on doors in the middle of the night, begging for help. When someone opened the door to let her in, a group of armed men would storm inside, taking everything of value and leaving the homeowners tied up and beaten. I felt sick. We had come so close. If even one of us had been brave, or stupid, enough to open that door, who knows what would have happened. The woman outside hadn't been a victim. She had been bait. From that night on, we always made sure the doors were locked, double-checked the windows, and never ignored our instincts. Fear had kept us safe that night, and I was never going to ignore that feeling again. Growing up, my parents were divorced, and I always felt closer to my mom than my dad. She was the one who took care of me every day, the one who made sure I had food to eat, clothes to wear, and a roof over my head. I loved my dad, but I was a mama's boy through and through. I worried about her constantly. When I was at school, I would find myself wondering if she was okay. If I was playing outside, I'd think about whether she was safe. It wasn't just little things, it was everything. My mind would come up with the worst possible scenarios. I always had this lingering fear that something bad would happen to her, and that one day she just wouldn't come home. She worked as a nursing assistant at a nursing home, always on the night shift. That meant she would leave in the evening and wouldn't be back until early morning. Her job was about 35 to 40 minutes away, and every night, as she drove to and from work, I worried. I would imagine the dark roads, the empty highways, and all the things that could go wrong. What if she got into an accident? What if someone was out there, waiting for her, watching? What if she never came back? I had a dream not too long ago, one that still sticks with me, even now. It wasn't like normal dreams where things were all over the place, random and nonsensical. This one played out like a movie, like I was watching it happen rather than experiencing it myself. It felt too real. My mom was driving home late at night. The road was one I recognized, a stretch of highway she always took. The streetlights cast a dim, orange glow on the pavement, flickering slightly as she passed. The car's headlights cut through the darkness ahead. The road was empty except for one other vehicle parked on the side. Smoke curled up from its hood. A man stood next to it, dressed in an army green beanie and a matching jacket. He looked like any other stranded motorist, someone who had just run into bad luck and needed help. She slowed down and pulled over. The man turned to look at her, his face partially shadowed by the streetlight. He took a step toward the passenger side. The car door unlocked with a soft click, and he got in, settling into the seat beside her. The car started moving again. He had a small backpack resting on his lap. As they drove, he unzipped it and started rummaging through it, his head slightly tilted down, eyes focused on whatever was inside. My mom kept her eyes on the road, her hands gripping the wheel. The car moved steadily through the darkness, the hum of the engine the only real sound. He pulled something out of the bag. It was small at first, just a glimpse of something metallic. Then he shifted it in his hand, and I could see it clearly, a tool, something like a drill, but not quite. The edges of it gleamed under the dim light, and when he pressed a button, it let out a low, mechanical whirring sound. He held it casually, his fingers gripping it loosely, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. His face stayed neutral, almost bored, as he turned his head slightly to look at my mom. She still wasn't looking at him. She just kept her eyes forward, completely unaware of what was happening right beside her. The man sat still for a moment, then adjusted his grip on the tool. The car moved forward, the road stretching ahead endlessly into the night. The streetlights flickered again. The man exhaled slowly, barely making a sound. His fingers tightened slightly. Then everything went black. I woke up gasping. My body was drenched in sweat, my heart hammering against my chest. It took me a second to realize I was in my own bed, safe, but my hands were shaking. I didn't even want to think about what would have happened next if the dream had continued. The worst part was how real it felt. It wasn't just some random nightmare with distorted faces and impossible scenarios. It felt like a memory, like something that could have actually happened. I could still see the man's face, the way he moved, the sound that tool made when he turned it on, the way my mom just kept driving, unaware of what was sitting beside her. I didn't tell her about the dream at first. I didn't want to scare her, and I didn't want her to think I was just being paranoid. But the feeling didn't go away. Every time she left for work, I felt sick to my stomach. Every time I heard the door close behind her, I wanted to run after her, to tell her to stay home, to beg her not to stop for anyone on the road. A few days later, I finally told her. I described everything in detail, my voice shaking as I spoke. She listened quietly, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she gave me a small smile and ruffled my hair like she always did when she wanted to reassure me. "You worry too much," she said. "I'm always careful." But I could see something in her eyes. Something that told me she was thinking about it more than she let on. That night, as she left for work, she hesitated before getting into the car. She looked around the driveway, then up at the sky. I watched her from the window, my chest tight. Then she got in and drove off, disappearing into the night. She never told me if my dream made her change anything about her routine. She never said if it made her more cautious, if it made her think twice about stopping for someone on the side of the road. But I noticed that after that night, she always called me before she left work. She never used to. It became a habit. A quick call, just to say she was on her way home. She never missed a call. Not once. And I never stopped worrying. I remember the way my brother looked that night when he came home. He wasn't the same. His eyes were distant, his face pale, like he had just seen something he wasn't supposed to. He didn't say anything for a while. He just sat at the edge of his bed, staring at the floor. Eventually, when he did speak, his voice was quiet, almost like he didn't want the words to exist. I'll never forget what he told me. It was late afternoon, the sky turning that deep shade of orange as the sun started to dip below the horizon. My brother had just started his training as a firefighter. He wasn't allowed to do much yet, just basic tasks, hauling equipment, checking hoses, making sure the trucks were in order. They didn't let the new guys get too involved at first. It was more of a test to see if they could handle the pressure, to see if they would stick around after their first real experience with what firefighters actually deal with. The call came in just before sunset. A church event, kids playing, a ball stuck in a tree. A man had climbed up to retrieve it. He fell, head first. The truck rolled up to the scene, sirens cutting through the cool evening air. My brother said he could already see the crowd gathered near the tree, standing back, whispering, eyes wide with a kind of helpless horror. The way people look when they see something awful, but can't do anything about it. The man was on the ground. He wasn't moving. My brother was still new, still adjusting to the reality of what being a firefighter meant. So he was in the back, watching as the more experienced guys jumped out. He followed, but slower. He said he could feel his heart pounding in his chest, this tight, sick feeling crawling up his spine, before he even got close enough to really see. Then he saw. The man's face was blue, like his body was already giving up, already shutting down. Blood smeared across his forehead, pooling near his mouth. His neck, my brother said he had never seen anything like that before. It wasn't just broken. It was twisted in a way that didn't make sense. Like his head didn't belong to his body anymore. And he was still alive. Barely. His mouth was open, but no real sound was coming out, just this awful, wet noise, like he was trying to breathe but couldn't. Foam and spit bubbled at the corners of his lips. His eyes were open, wide, staring. My brother said they were unfocused, like he wasn't really seeing anything anymore, just trapped in the moment before death, waiting for his body to let go. The firefighters moved fast, checking for vitals, calling for an ambulance. But everyone knew. Everyone there knew it wasn't going to matter. The kids who had been playing were still standing nearby. Some of them were crying. Some just stood frozen, hands over their mouths. One of the firefighters tried to get them to turn away, to go inside, but it was too late. They had already seen it. They would never forget it. My brother said he just stood there, hands at his sides, watching, because he didn't know what else to do. He wasn't trained for this part. He wasn't trained to watch someone die. And then, the man tried to speak. Or at least, that's what it looked like. His lips moved, his throat convulsed, but nothing came out except more of that awful, wet sound. A firefighter knelt beside him, speaking softly, trying to comfort him. But what could you even say to someone in a moment like that? What words could possibly help? The man blinked, and for a second, it almost seemed like he was still there, still aware. And then he wasn't. His body twitched once, then went completely still. His eyes, already wide, didn't close. The paramedics showed up a few minutes later, but it didn't matter. He was gone. They covered him, loaded him up, took him away. The crowd started to break apart, people murmuring, shaking their heads, going back inside the church, going home. But my brother stayed. He just stood there, staring at the spot where the man had been, staring at the blood still staining the ground. One of the firefighters clapped him on the shoulder and told him it wouldn't be the last time he saw something like that. He told him to get used to it, but my brother never really did. That night, he came home different. He didn't say much, just sat on his bed, quiet. I asked him if he was okay. He just nodded, but I knew he would never forget that man's face. I knew it would stay with him, buried somewhere deep, coming back in flashes when he least expected it. Some things never leave you. Some things stay in your head forever, and that was one of them. I sat on the couch, cradling my newborn, the soft glow of the TV casting flickering shadows across the dimly lit living room. It was late, probably past midnight, but time had started to blur ever since bringing the baby home. I was exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that sits in your bones and makes you feel like you're moving through water. But the baby needed to be fed, and there was no one else to do it. My husband was out of town. The house felt emptier without him, but I was used to it. Nights like this had become routine. The baby shifted slightly in my arms, making a small noise, and I gently adjusted my hold, rocking slightly in place. The dogs were upstairs in the master bedroom, and for a moment, the house was still. Then the noise started. At first, it was faint, a light thumping sound, almost like the creaking of the house settling, but it grew louder fast, too fast. It became a rhythmic pounding, the unmistakable sound of paws hitting the floor, claws skidding against wood as the dogs ran back and forth across the bedroom above me. I sighed, already annoyed. They did this all the time, chasing each other around like maniacs, usually because one had swiped something they shouldn't have, underwear, a sock, maybe even one of the baby's blankets. I took a deep breath, trying not to wake the baby, and called out, my voice sharp in the quiet. Knock it off and come downstairs. The thudding didn't stop. If anything, it got louder, the racing steps crashing against the floor, the kind of noise that could only be made by a large dog running at full speed. My Rottweiler, Tank, was heavy enough that when he moved, you felt it more than heard it. The walls almost seemed to vibrate with the force of their running. I rolled my eyes. Seriously, cut it out. Nothing changed. The chaos continued, the sound of scrambling paws and the occasional low thump, like something being knocked over. Annoyance prickled at me, and I adjusted the baby in my arms, preparing to get up and go deal with them myself. And then, just as I shifted forward, the noise stopped. Complete silence. It took me a second to process it. The house, which had been filled with the chaotic noise of the dogs running, was now deathly quiet. My heart, already beating faster from the irritation, now thudded for a different reason. The silence stretched too long, unnatural after all that noise. It felt like something had changed, like the air in the room had thickened. Then I heard movement behind me. A soft, familiar sound, Tank stretching, his collar jingling slightly as he woke up. I turned my head slowly, and there he was, stepping out from behind the other couch, shaking off sleep. My breath caught in my throat. He had been there the whole time. But that wasn't possible. I felt my chest tighten, my grip on the baby tightening unconsciously. My other dog was at the groomer. Tank was here, in the living room with me. There was no one upstairs. Nothing should have been making that noise. My arms felt numb. My whole body felt like it had been dipped in ice water. I stared at Tank as he stretched again, yawning, completely unaware of the weight of the realization that had just hit me. There had been something upstairs. My heart pounded in my ears. I tried to think of an explanation, some rational reason for what I had heard, but nothing made sense. The sound had been too clear, too real. It had been right above me. I knew the way my dogs moved, knew the way their paws sounded against the floor. It had been them, or at least, it had sounded like them. Except it wasn't. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I didn't want to move, didn't want to make a sound. but my mind was already racing. Should I go upstairs? Check. My stomach twisted at the thought. I didn't want to go up there. I couldn't. I sat frozen, barely breathing, listening for any sign of movement. The house remained unnervingly silent. I knew logically that I needed to check, needed to make sure no one was up there. But every instinct in my body screamed at me to stay put, to pretend I had heard nothing, to wait until morning, until the daylight made everything feel safe again. Tank let out a low huff and settled back down, completely unbothered. I envied his calm. My pulse was hammering so loudly I could hear it in my ears. The silence stretched on, and I told myself I was overreacting, that it was nothing, that maybe I had imagined the sound, even though I knew I hadn't. I stayed on the couch the rest of the night, refusing to move except to shift the baby when necessary. I didn't go upstairs. I didn't even look toward the staircase. I just sat there, staring at the TV without really seeing it, my skin crawling with the knowledge that something had been up there. And I had no idea what it was. It wasn't the first time something like this had happened. A few months back, my friend had stayed over while my husband was out of town. She had slept downstairs on the couch, just like I was now. In the morning, she had casually asked me why I had been walking around upstairs in the middle of the night. I had laughed, told her she must have heard Tank. She shook her head, looking unsettled. Tank was with me, she had said. He was snoring beside me the whole time. I had brushed it off back then, blamed it on the house settling, on her imagination. But now, sitting there in the dark, my baby warm and sleeping in my arms, I couldn't brush it off anymore. Something was in this house, and it only seemed to make itself known when I was alone. I didn't sleep that night, didn't even try. When morning finally came, and the first rays of light seeped through the windows, I let out a shaky breath. It felt different now, the fear not as suffocating in the daylight. But I still didn't go upstairs, and I wasn't sure I ever would again.